thank you, Frodan and Bryce, and all the past guests on the show for all the countless hours of entertainment and memes you've brought to the community. I hope this isn't the true end for content similar to this in the future. Hashtag paid chatter, hashtag WGlaze, hashtag not an ad.
Hello.
Hello, we got Mortdog. I do have to ask, were you watching the whole time?
I was.
I
was.
All right.
For better or worse, I was.
You don't have to say that so disappointingly.
I mean, were you there for the first bit?
Yes.
We're gonna do this in two parts. We originally had a concept for Mort that was kind of building on something that happened last show, which was there were some agrees that came up that were a little bit more in the kind of bigger picture of the TFT design and balance space. And Mort was weighing in on it a little bit via chat, and we were like, "Come on in," and he was like, "I don't want to stop the flow," which I really appreciate because I think the conversation that we're about to have deserves all of the nuance it can get, and I want it to be a dedicated period of time. And so there's a lot. Yeah, this is going to be at least an hour, man. This conversation is I'm excited because I feel like this is a great final thing for me to do in TFT. I have a lot of strong opinions about like the perfect state of the game. Mort and I have disagreed about some stuff. We've agreed about some stuff. I think it's really clear that we are somewhat aligned on goals. Although part of what I want to talk about is, are we all the way aligned on goals? And so I want to get as far into the weeds as we can, and I want to have it like weirdly in the weeds on the philosophical discussion. Like, what should we be striving for is the question. Because the reality is that this game is so fucking hard to like get right from a design and balance perspective, and you guys are making it up as you go along. And anyone who doesn't think you're anything other than S tier at that are idiots. And I know there's a lot of noise out there, Mort, and I just want to like lead off with, that is nonsense. Everyone here knows it, and I'm interested in having the conversation like one layer deeper, right? And so and the fact that you're willing to come on and have this conversation is insane, by the way. Like, people don't realize how lucky we are that you're willing to come have this conversation with us. So thank you so much for giving us your time the day before your new set launches.
we didn't even ask Riot PR. Actually, maybe I should.
So thank you so much for being here, Mort. So do you have any like opening thoughts about this or any framing coming into the conversation you want to get out there? Or you want to just get into it?
I mean, so I'm kind of interested in this conversation. It's the thing is, generally when I'm talking to players, right, I'm doing it at a surface level. I'm doing it very like, here it is at its presenting. But the reality is TFT is like a deep game, and not just deep in like the theoretical, like you can play well sense, but it's like, it's a math game. Like at its absolute core, it's a game of math. And like, you know, growing up, I was good at math. Backup thing was going to be a mathematician. We've got one other, like Phil was almost a mathematician, and we talked him out of it to come be a designer on TFT. But when you really break it down to like the math and the decision making, you can have some really intense conversations. And I don't have those conversations publicly a lot, so we'll see how deep it goes. But it's really fascinating all the different ways you can do it, because you also have to take into account what can be, not just what is. And that's another part of design that often isn't looked at. People are looking at sort of, here is what TFT is, but you have to consider all the realms of possibility of where we could take it. What happens if we make these changes to the fundamental systems? Blah, 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 TLDR.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
You don't have to blah, blah, blah. For tonight, more, I want you to never feel like you have to say blah, blah, blah. Just let it rip in as much detail as you got. Because the part of what's fun about this is we're going to do it in the format of agree.
Yeah,
so
this is basically the biggest agree we've ever done.
Yeah, I'm just warning you now, though, like when I get deep, like if you've ever thought I was a nerd before, this is going to tilt that to 11.
I'm here for that. I'm excited to have a forum to do that. I feel like that is what this show has been all about, really. That's like what we were after. So I'm pumped.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to do it in agree format. Robin and Dan, you guys should feel free to weigh in too. The theory is just, I'm going to start off with a statement that I think should be true. We're going to do goals, then we're going to do design, then we're going to do balance. Goals we'll do a little bit kind of grouped together, and the balance and design stuff, we're going to break it down. And I try to go from like easier to harder. So I think we're more likely to agree on the earlier statements, move into controversial. The idea being, bring up the statement, I'll make a brief argument as to why I think it's the case. If you agree, build on it, add thoughts, whatever. But we can move through the stuff we're on the same page on to get to the meat and potatoes, if that sounds good. Okay, so let's do the goals first. So I have like an overarching goal, and then I have some like specific executions of the goal. The overarching goal is that I think that great TFT creates room throughout the game for player agency to combat ongoing variance swings. I think part of what makes TFT really special is that there's so many curveballs the game throws at your way in so many of the systems, and that's part of what makes it really fun, is the experience of every game is different. You have to fly by the seat of your pants, as long as it feels like there's still real player control over it. And so it's like this constant pull and push of like inject variance, inject opportunity for skill expression in response in order to make the game feel like, even though it's taking you in random directions, within your power. So to me, that's like, I think TFT is the best strategy game ever created, and I think that's about as simple of a statement as I can make as to why. Curious for your thoughts on the statement.
I mean, so do you want me to break down each goal here? Or
So you can, yeah. Any goal that you disagree with, please put it up there. These goals are like the kind of
Yeah,
specific manifestations of it.
So what's interesting is, hilariously, internally, we have a thing that we made more than 5 years ago, which are sort of the design pillars of TFT. It was a document I wrote, like I said, more than 5 years ago, and it has not changed. So a lot of these do overlap, and some of them are right for sure. I'll read them to you at a really high level, which is like, TFT is an accessible game for everyone, deep mastery curve, highly variant and replayable, rewards skill and mastery, many paths to victory, and is about building and chasing a dream, and is exciting and engaging to watch, right? And they sound generic and high level, but those are like principles of our game that we will not budge on, right? So like, I look at like goal number 1 here, and it's like, TFT should reward playing the way Mortdog intended. For the most part, I agree with this. Now, one of the things we have to be careful, though, is like, when you make a video game and you sort of tell players, you have to play the way I intended you to play, that can backfire pretty hard, right? That can tell a lot of people that, like, this game isn't for me. Not everyone wants to, like, adapt on the flow. We have a large subsection of players, and we've researched this, we've talked to players. I'm not going to say the number, but there's a chunky group of players that, like, kind of want to just log in and play their favorite comp. And they want to enjoy that, right? And, like, so from our angle, that's always been a thing that we want to make sure is doable, but never optimal, right? What I don't want is set 5 worlds where it is optimal to log in and play Kled reroll, right? Like, that's not good. But I do want most players to be able to log in and play Kled reroll and have fun with it. And that's fine, right? So, like, that's the difference there. It's the optimal versus, allowable.
Completely agree with that. And I think the calibration for me is, like, obviously you cannot push the game to a level that becomes unfun for the casual player, because the casual player is the overwhelming majority of the audience. So it'd be ridiculous to do anything. But
I want to be careful.
I think there's space for both, right?
I want to be careful that we don't conflate casual and just people, right? Because there are challenger players that want to log in and force. I forget his name, but that one guy who used to force Zed, that one said all the time.
Hey, DPay was a Zed main. I gave DPay so much shit for that when he became good at the game.
Yeah, so I mean, like, there are just players of all skill levels that want to do this, right?
Totally
like, we need to make sure they want to have fun, right?
You're
so
totally right.
goal 2, stylistic flexibility. Yeah, similar thing for sure, right? I think that's definitely true. TFT should incentivize players to roll at various stages of the game. Yep, for sure. One of the things we don't want necessarily is, again, if it's optimal, to always play the exact same way, right? Where it's like level at 2-1, level at 2-5, level at 3-2, level at 3-5, roll at 4-2. Like, no, that's a bad thing, right? And so we want to make sure there's variance there. So 100% agree. TFT should incentivize players to build boards but not play comps. Same thing as goal number 1 here.
Yep.
And the percentage of games where players commit in stage 2 should be reduced. This one's trickier. In theory, I agree with you. I actually 100% agree with you. In practice, this one's been a lot harder, right? Because this is one of the fundamental things about TFT that keeps me up at night, where it's like, we've been playing the same fundamental baseline TFT, right? 1 through 5 costs, rolling odds, things like that, at for more than 5 years. Like, people like Robin and Milk and things like that, they know how to play TFT. And so, like, even when we say they're committing at stage 2, what they're actually doing is they understand all the possible outcomes they could do. They know the peaks of those potential outcomes, and they've already got a plan in their head, right? Like, they've solved the game so much that it's almost impossible to say they haven't committed, because they already know all the paths. So in order for this to be true for a player like Robin, those paths have to insanely be variant within themselves. But every time we do that through a system mechanic, there's a lot of pushback, because now it's not a predictable outcome, right? Encounters was this to a certain extent, right? Where it's like, all of a sudden the paths are variable, you can't change them, you have to adapt on the fly. And people went, no, because I had this plan and you fucked with this plan, so I'm just screwed and I lose now. It's like, okay, cool, I get that. So there's a level of, like, we need you to have things that, like, change that path, but not so much that it feels like those things that change the path decided the outcome of the entire game. And that's been the design challenge, is how do we make sure that that's a reality? That's a big one, right? Like, I don't know that we have the answer yet, or if we do, it's stuff I can't talk about yet, so.
I mean, it makes a ton of sense. I guess the way where I get lost on this is, I think that, like, great version of TFT starts as a decision tree that like webs its way down, right?
Yep.
And you start off with like you're starting like the opposite, right? You're starting with the infinite possibilities and you're narrowing down to get to one.
Correct.
And I guess I feel like if yes, you like these players that know the outcomes. The problem is that if the game feels to them like they actually can know out all the outcomes, then they can make that decision earlier. But if the game feels like they can't, if there's too many different possible paths from a spot, then they have to like, okay, everyone has a lean at a point in time. You know, on 2-1, I'm 70% this comp, right? I play this comp 70% of games. But I think it should be like much more. It should feel like I weight towards this line more early, as opposed to I am playing this line early, which feels like it's been optimal in the game for some time, but it wasn't before from my perception.
Yeah, and I think part of that has changed because, again, like the solvability, right? Like a lot of the flexibility, you go back and watch like a set 3, a set 4 video, is simply because we didn't know what was optimal, right? I think a lot of people were still figuring out like what's the optimal ash board. Or the other thing that happens is a lot of the times in early TFT, there were central units that were so strong and so frankly overpowered that everything around them almost didn't matter. And that's what would determine flex, right? So like using set 4 Ash as an example, it's like as long as you had an Ash and a tank, who cared what the other units were, right? Like that board could win. And so really you were flexing around individual units that were very strong. And so one of the ways to create the reality that you're describing would be to take trait power, cut it 80%, you know, and focus on unit power, right? Because then it becomes all about the units you face. The problem we've had when we do that is that for most of our players, the traits exist, right? And there's a point of satisfaction. And so it's like, I hit this optimal trait point. We saw this all like in set 2, right? Where it's like, I hit 6 Infernal. That's nice. That trait doesn't do crap. And so the satisfaction of the game drastically decreases. And so again, like for optimal flex play, hilariously enough, you would actually delete traits. And I've thought about this before. Like traits are bad for flexibility.
Yes, for sure.
You know, it's like you would just play the units you hit. The one thing is like you could argue that 2-piece traits are good for flexibility because at least they create anchor points where it's like, ooh, I'm going to build around this and build around this versus literally I just hit whatever and there's no decision making. But as soon as you go to like 3s and 4s and 5s, all of a sudden, like what you can play together is limited because of the maximum power potential of anything that you could build around a particular comp, right? And Ash was an example where like what she was a hunter, and it was like you didn't need more than 2 hunter, right? 4 hunter was a fake trait. And that's what created the flexibility. And so like that's been the other give and pull around design is like traits versus unit power. More unit power equals more flex, but less satisfaction. Find where you want to be on that line.
And yeah, we're going to talk about that one actually directly. Like that's going to be one of the agrees later. And I think we're completely on the agreement of like that there's a spectrum there. I think it's just where the calibration is on the spectrum.
And that's an interesting thing too, and I want to talk about that as well, because like Fairy and Portal and other traits from like set 12 are perfect examples of actually like where this can go wrong if you end up on the wrong side of this line.
Yes.
So, yep.
And that's why for me it's more interesting to talk about the line, because the reality is the execution is really, really hard. But if it's like you're aligned on where the line is, then you just keep shooting at that, and you'll get some wins, you'll get some losses.
So, Mort, would you agree? A lot of people have a sentiment, and I think Robin can back me up here, but it felt like set 12 hit a major turning point when the 0.25 set hit and they reworked Fairy. And I think a lot of people said that was when I think set 12 kind of lost track of itself on the rails. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I would agree that I understand where that perception comes from, right? Because beforehand, again, just like we talked about, Fairy was a 2-piece that was insanely powerful,
right?
Like the amount of power that 2-piece was providing was ludicrous. And so you would flex around that 2-piece, right? And then you could play it in a variety of ways. But if you went higher in Fairy, because you're like, I trust the developers make Fairy a trait, you were terrible, because why the fuck would you do that? It was a terrible trait. Even at 6, 4, 6, and 8 were fake points, right? So again, it's just another example of where you are on that spectrum. And so the players who like that flex play, Fairy being 2, being very powerful, super fun in flex, but for minor, And so realistically, I would say, had we launched it the other way, we might have ended up in a better spot, because typically we have a lot of our like less engaged players at the start of a set. So if we had the like 3, 5, 7, have those players come, they play the game, they move on, we stick with the professional players, then we switched it back to 2, we might have actually done a better thing for the game, given the audience that is playing the game at any particular time during a set.
Oh, please. In the ideal state, though, you don't make it like always that verticals are broken at the beginning, and then you make it
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah,
as
but
time
no,
goes
but
on.
realistically, though, is that such a bad thing if we understand that the audience has different needs given times through the set? Is
No.
that really that terrible?
I think
That's
that sounds like
actually
a
pretty
reasonable
smart.
trade-off. Sorry, go for it, Robin.
Oh no, I said like most of my casual friends, they love verticals, and then
Yeah.
they just they load in and they want to play 5 fairy every single game. They actually, if it's like
Right.
flex, it's too hard for them. They don't understand how to play, and it just like turns them off.
Exactly. And so, like, I think realistically, like, launching a set where verticals are strong and good allows for players to have that fun. But I also agree that we don't want worlds to be decided by 8 portal versus
Yeah.
7 fairy versus, what was that set?
Set 9.
5? Well, yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
I was
yeah,
gonna say
set
set
9.
9 worlds was just basically pop your tome.
Yeah, I was thinking Dawnbringer versus Nightbringer versus
Set
whatever.
5.
But yeah, set 9's a much better example. But yeah, TLDR, like, that's not where we want worlds. So I could also see us doing sort of a gradual shift as we get to that more competitive space as necessary. But that also goes against the major goal, which is like, ideally we launch the set in a balanced state and don't touch it. But again, that definition of balance will be changed by your perception of what the goal should be. As we nerf verticals, the casual players are going, this is terrible. As we buff the 2s and 3s, and so like that's the trade-off, right?
I see,
Everything's
I
a
see, I
trade-off
see.
here.
This is great. This is exactly what I want. And Dan and Robin, please feel free, like, whenever it will be very easy for me to bogart this conversation unintentionally. Just as a heads up.
That's
So,
fine.
please
I'm
hop in.
having fun just copy pasting Mortdog's face all over the place.
I love it. Okay, so for TFT design, so starting easier, trait webs should naturally connect to one another. It just creates like a better feeling of the play throughout the game. Yeah. I don't think we need to get into that one deeply. There should be relatively co-equal benefits from playing loss streak and win streak. My POV is that because you can't control the starting hand you're dealt. And so I really like the idea of no matter what starting hand you're dealt, it's usable in this game. And I think that there have been moments where the game really felt like that and then moments where it haven't. And whenever it feels like that, it feels extra good to me because most variance games actually aren't like that. You get a bad hand, it's just your odds in the game have gone dramatically down. So I love the experience of TFT breaking from that.
Yeah, so same thing here. Pillar 1, trait webs should naturally connect to each other. Generally, yes. There's like one minor exception. And again, this goes back to like new players understanding a set. Generally, an insular vertical is really nice. It creates connection points where you have like, we call them trait twins, where you have like a 1 and a 4 who are both bruisers and portal or whatever, right? And it's like, that fits really well. But generally, having some cross allows you to mix up. One of the other things we found, for example, is like every 1 cost should have a trait pair with another 1 cost. So it allows you a nice starting point that bridges into the set.
Yeah.
It was something we discovered right around set 10, where it was like, man, there's just one unit that has no trait pairs. She's really hard to ever play on a board. And so, like, yeah, it creates those natural connection points that start to build you out. Loss streak and win streak, I mostly agree, but there is an exception here. Because we've seen when loss streaking is too strong, like, because I agree with you that, like, one of the problems we've talked about is that stage 2 agency feels bad, right? Like, stage 2, honestly, you can, from 2-1, kind of understand that, like, am I loss streaking or am I win streaking? And there aren't really a lot of decisions to make at that point. It's like, cool, I'll see you on 3-2, right? Other than, like, maybe I'll try to avoid the other loss streaker, or if I'm win streaking, I might. But, like, one of the things that really drives us nuts is you don't even, like, that reroll button almost shouldn't exist and is a noob trap for the entirety of stage 2, which is ludicrous. So stage 2 agency has been something that's been on our mind. But the other thing is that even with stage 2, there should be a slight reward for winning and playing well. So if you told me it's actually supposed to be like 55-45, I'd be closer to that versus equal. But I do agree that, like, what I don't want is 70-30, right? Where it's like, if I didn't hit any 2 stars on 2-1, I'm just at, like, this massive deficit. Like, no, that's terrible. So agree mostly.
Third goal was there should always be units that shred and burn, especially at higher cost. The theory is, and I'm totally in favor of moving away from a design structure where it's required, but it feels like we took a shot at that and missed, and I think it's going to be tough to figure that particular problem out. And so I like the idea of giving item access and unit access in a way that feels like it actually has the impact on the board and can fit.
Okay, so this is an interesting one because we've talked about this before, and generally we agree, right? Like, the perception, especially from some of our more skilled players on the team, is like, you need shred, sunder, whichever one you're playing, and you need anti-heal, right? Like, those are musts. And so back in the day, we used to actually put them on units, right? Because, like, it was like, hey, if you need anti-heal. But the reality was, and this is the thing I pushed back on, and I'm open to being wrong on this, but nobody was changing their optimal comp to flex in anti-heal because they were missing it, right? Like if you look at an optimized, like let's take the 5 fairy board from everything else, you're not taking out a unit to put in the unit that has anti-heal. That's just not how trait webs work. Without them being threat units. If they're threat units, totally, that can work, right? Because then it's like you have this flex unit. But because they're connected to the trait web, you're not ditching 3 multi-striker to toss the Hecarim or whatever to put in this anti-heal 5 cost. Like that's just not how it works. And so because of that, I've actually been pushing away from putting the too much utility on the champions themselves and instead focusing on trying to make sure there are a lot more avenues within the other various systems so that you can have access to them. Because agree, it should be relatively easy to get these things. But like I said, I don't see that realistic world. Like the quintessential example of this came up was 3-cost Misfortune, right? Like 3-cost Misfortune has anti-heal, and what it basically turned into was if you're playing a comp that used Misfortune, cool. If you're not putting in Misfortune in your comp. That's just not how it works.
So this actually segues perfectly into the next one. So let's flip to the next one, and I'll do them slightly out of order. But
I think for the new set, it might be the beginning of the set, but I feel like you can just put in Rumble if you need anti-heal. But it might be because no one knows what comps there is.
No, it's because Rumble's a Sentinel. It's because Rumble's a Sentinel and he gives you 2 Sentinel in every comp. You're going to play Rumble in like every comp because 2 Sentinel is such a damn good trait. We've been talking about this with a lot of the 5 costs, and it's like Rumble's going to end up on basically every board, which hilariously enough behind the scenes was kind of an anti-goal because he's not one of the characters of the show. So it was like, oh goody, everyone's going to have Rumble on their board. Meanwhile, Jinx, who is actually like, the main character of the show, is like, has a really narrow line. She's strong, but like you have to have a really good setup and really good items for her. And it's like, this doesn't quite feel right.
That's such a design to a TV show must have been a wild exercise.
From Arcane.
It's already hard enough to design. You have to now do it around that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust me, we made jokes. Nico was always famous for being like, "Oh yeah, my favorite part in the show was when Rumble came in and messed up everything." It's like, no,
hey, spoilers.
Yeah.
For all we know, Rumble's not in the show yet.
Yeah, it's true. We still have another act.
That's true.
Okay, so I like to skip to pillar 6 here actually because I think it dovetails perfectly off the conversation we were just having, which is that I think threat and support units should be part of every set. This is actually I shoehorned 2 together, but there were going to be 10 and 9 fit better, so this is kind of 2 separately. I think threat should exist in part because of this shred and burn thing. I think that having the access to it via units really good. So give it something that makes sense and have optionality around it from the unit level. I also think threats are just objectively good for the feel of the game. If you're a weaker player, or not a weaker player, if you're just not someone who wants to like no life the game, if you're interested in playing verticals, right? Then you can just ignore them. Like you don't have to play around the threats. It doesn't like feel bad as long as one of them is not like insanely imbalanced. And if it is, then you can it's there. If you're getting mad because there's an insanely imbalanced threat and you're unwilling to buy it, that is actually a little bit on you. And I'm kind of fine with that punish. So I feel like threats aren't disruptive of that player experience, but do really healthy things for pro TFT, and I think they're kind of fun too, especially if you're playing around with like trait power relative to unit power. Having something that can fall a little bit stronger and outside the paradigm actually is kind of nice for some players too, like that kind of fantasy.
Yep. So the short answer here is I actually agree. It's going to be one of those things we're not going to snap our fingers and starting with set 14, every set's going to have threats. Like that's not going to be that easy. But I actually, from a fundamental and design standpoint, I actually agree here. I do think threats do some very good things for the set. I do think the type of unit a threat is supposed to be is very specific. I don't think you just make like a backline ADC that is a threat. Like that's not a thing. But like I look at like Rammus and Morgana, for example. Rammus was the tank who did the AoE CC. Morgana was a backline AP carry that specifically provided stun and shred sunder. Like, yeah, those are great units. Like if I hypothetically could just put Rammus and Morgana in every set right now, I probably would. Right? Because they just do good things for the game where it's like they open up lines like, 6 sniper as example. Like, do you realistically play 6 sniper? No, but you could with like a Rammus threat in the set. That would do really good things. Yep. It like allows for different lines to be more playable. So the answer is yes here. I'll also, there's work being done here is what I'll say. So it is something that needs to be done. It needs to be done right. I think like, for example, 12, we threw in a Wukong, like, that wasn't it, right? Like that wasn't it.
Yes.
What is
and
the
what about support
response
units
that you have when someone like Ramblin says like, there's no support for costs. It's like a huge point of enjoyment for the game for them, and they want support. I know that the official stance was that people don't like when units just like don't do anything. You put items on them, and you want that to be like a thing. When players are so outspoken about like we want those support units to exist, does that mean like what is your response to that?
So when a unit is their job is pure support, I think they do very bad things for the game. I think they end like we talk about like Janna, Orianna, stuff like that. These are units that basically don't ever get put items on, right? Set 5.5 Revival really reignited this in me, where it's like Lulu, who you literally could see in the data, if you put items on her, your AVP started to drop. You put a Radiant item on Lulu and your AVP dropped like 1.0. It's ludicrous, right? Like those units should not exist. Those are traps for players. That's a bad thing. Like set 3 Soraka, right? Where it's like all she did was heal. And it's like, cool. How do I win the fight when my Soraka with Shojin Death Cap is just healing? They don't, right? Like I don't think that's a thing.
Did you like Orianna because of the damage shielding hybrid? Like how did you feel about Orianna relative to these other two out of curiosity?
Well, the problem was like, again, you couldn't actually put, like you'd put spare items on them, right? It was like, and so because we only have 12 units in the 4-cost space, wasting one of those slots with like a champion you're not really supposed to put items on except secondarily really isn't that fun. And we talk about how we want to make sure there's a large variety of lines. If we only have 12 4 costs or 12 4 costs, 8 of them are 4 of them are tanks, 8 of them are carries, but 2 of those carries aren't actually carries, they're support units. Now all of a sudden we've only got 6 units, and the number of things are that you can play have gone down even more. That being said, I'm not opposed to support outputs, and that's why I like the Morgana example, right? Like Morgana clearly provided CC and Shred and Sunder, but she did damage. She ended fights, right? Like I like set 8 Sona, for example. It's like she provided the heal, she provided the stun, but also did damage, right? Like these champions just need to actually be functional carries. But where we've seen this be bad, right? Like set 12 Nami, right? Like set 12 Nami was not a functional carry. You could not play her as a carry. You'd still play her in like 3 mage comps because that wave was great, but that's just not where we want champions. So
why the karma change this set?
So again, same thing where it was like people were playing her just for the heal. And the thing about Karma was if you looked at her kit for like any average player, it was like she's a dot mage, but also heals, but the heal is percentage based and proximity based. So if you're a champion who has a tank with a high heal, who is going to be in proximity of the kill, then you should play it in those comps only. And that fundamentally sort of narrowed the comps she should be playable in. And it was eating up a pretty large part of her power budget. So what we should have done was remove that and focus on her being a carry, right? Or if we wanted to have some sort of heal in there, simplified the output, right? Like if it was something like a gunblade output that was literally just like a percentage of the damage done is dealt to the tank, great, fine. But the current version we shipped with was like, again, proximity-based, percent HP. It was very confusing.
Okay.
I agree. It was not a lot of fight clarity. Robin, did you even know what Karma did at all? But I actually feel like I didn't even know what she really did before her rework.
I just knew that like when someone died, the people around it healed a little bit.
Yeah.
Or something.
Okay, going back to sort of something you said, Mort, is that you want something for all the kinds of players. It seems like, at least vocally, for some of the competitive players, they want what you described. You're like, well, for us, we actually don't mind if their role is pure support. So is this a decision that you're making more for like the average player of TFT? And that feels like it punishes people who actually want that experience.
No, I mean, again, I understand that people want the support unit, but what they're actually saying is, I want every unit in my comp to have a purpose to strengthen my comp, right? They're saying that when I play Ashe carry, I want the unit standing next to her to provide Ashe a shield or a speed buff or something like that, right? They want to lean into everything they can to sort of funnel into that carry and support fantasy. The problem is, like, let's say we shipped Janna today, right? Like, literally just Janna. She's in set 12 now. And for all intents and purposes, we'll even make her a threat, right? She's just a threat support unit. With the current bag sizes, it's going to be race to the Janna, right? Like, that's just not going to be a good thing. Everyone's going to want Janna on their board unless, and this is where it goes back to the balance, right? You have the trait trade-offs, right? Like, maybe the Callista boards don't want her because they can't fit her because of their trait web, but a board that actually has a flex slot will absolutely want her unless the power trade-off is different, right? If Janna's so good that you're willing to give up 2 Bastion in the Callista board or 2 Preserver in the Callista board, great. That's fine, right? And that just goes back to that balance thing. But essentially, Janna just becomes essentially a one-piece trait that isn't actually a unit for your team, which is really weird.
Yeah, the ideal would be that it's like it fills a role, obviously not like an overpowered role, but like a role, especially a role that like some comps could use. That's part of the reason why I like the overlap of Shred and Burn on threats, is because then it's like, okay, it plays a role and it's a choice you can make. And
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I love the idea
Mm-hmm.
of putting like utility specifically on 3 and 5 costs. I love it on 3 and 5 costs where it's like, cool, that's a thing, and then make those threats. So I like I said, I would put literally Rammus and Morgana in every set right now.
Pillar 4. So I really think this is mostly a kudos to you guys. I think this was an issue that I saw earlier in the game, and I feel like it's been slow and steady like move towards this. And I feel like while not perfect, I'm not sure it's ever fair to make the goal perfect. I think this is basically a home run. So it seems like you guys agree, and it definitely seems like it's what happened in the game.
Yeah, this one's tricky because this one is actually like the more we shift in one direction, it does both good and bad things for the game, right? If you go back to the very first items, like set 1 items, and let's talk about Hurricane, right? Hurricane used to proc on hits and be this like 80 attack speed item.
Yeah.
And the people who could use it were very, very narrow, right? It was like, if you had an on hit, you should use it, right? And so it was like, you couldn't play Vayne without Hurricane, right? Or things like that. You had to play that line. And over time, you know, and so that was the thing. It was like champions were very like hard bound to specific item builds to make them do well. But the problem was if you know, as we slowly shifted it into more generic items, right? Where like the oversimplified version of this is I want you to imagine every single item in the game just said plus 40% damage, right? Like that's all the item did. And so it didn't really matter what item you slammed on them. You get 40% damage, right?
Yep.
That's the most homogenistic, like simplified version of the item system. In that world, though, it's like, well, then what items you get don't matter, and there's no decision making, right? And the items are boring. They're just boring. They're not fun, right? But so as we've shifted towards that, the items have become less fun, right? Like Deathcap's not necessarily fun. Archangels isn't necessarily fun, right? They're just like, yep, they make me do some more damage. Woo! Now we found a way to sort of circumvent that with artifacts. Artifacts have sort of become our, here's where we get to let you like break the rules and have sort of narrow things, and items can become these simplified, homogeneous damage amps essentially, right? And so we're still trying to figure out that perfect identity. I don't think we're there, but that seems to be the direction we're sort of going, which is like core items are power up, artifacts are unique, interesting outputs, and then we'll go from there. But again, trying to make sure that it's fun, intuitive, because right now the other thing is the item system is still probably the least approachable part of TFT, even though we have simplified it quite a bit. And so we just need to continue to improve in that space.
I mean, I totally get that there's like opportunity to move it forward and make it even better, but I think you guys are turning in a really, really positive direction here. And it's the fun thing about this whole conversation is that there's levers on everything. It's like in any of these scenarios, you could envision the extreme on one and then one on the other. And its question is just what should the calibration be?
Exactly.
Like
And that's
which end of the spectrum are we on for this issue? And it does vary a lot issue by issue.
And that's the thing that makes this job so exciting, right? Is because the possibilities of what an item can be, right, are on that spectrum, right? We can go all the way to that generic 40% output, all the way over to this incredibly creative, really interesting, you know, narrow subset. And all of those are technically viable. The question is just what's best. And we get to sit there and sort of like figure that out. So
yeah, and we're using our hands like this because it's easy to show on camera. But the reality is it's like fun to unfun, and it's like ubiquitous to non-ubiquitous, right?
Yep.
And you can play in infinite parts of that grid. It's so interesting. Robin, any thoughts on that? Or actually, there's another item one that's next, which is that I think that for the niche items that are still part of the set, right, which I identified as Blue Buff, Rageblade, Crown Guard, and Runons, there need to be sufficient users of them, because I think that part of the item economy is that all items are slammable. We played a high percentage early in TFT's history where it felt like a narrow percentage slammable. We're increasing that number, but I think the game plays best when it feels like everything is. So you need to have people that like make sense to hold these items. And we've had tons of sets where that hasn't been the case for some of them, right? And some where it's been over calibrated to others. Like,
oh yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about how like realistically, Rageblade is probably an artifact. It's not actually an item because, but again, it's the most popular item.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's really hard to justify. Blue Buff and Shojin have been the other two that we actually like internally kind of hate because it's like we just have to assume every caster has one of them. You know, like you don't realistically play a lot of casters without one or the other. And so mana generation has been another part of the item system that hasn't really, you know, been in a great spot. And then weirdly enough, there's like AD casters now that like sometimes Shojin is a bait, even though it intuitively should work, right? We had to redo
when it does
Namzi.
work, like Ezreal last set, it's like feels good, right? Like it feels really good actually.
Right, but like at the start of the set, Namzi, for example, Namzi and Ezreal didn't actually want Shojin, even though intuitively you thought they did, because the percentage of their spell wasn't really high. And so like that was a big problem. And so we've kind of been shifting to what an AD caster is as well. But again, the assumption that all of them have to have Shojin and blue buff or blue buff means tiers are at a premium, and then you go back to item economy and things like that. So
Didn't Shojin get buffed like 580 or something, or 1080?
Yep.
And then that's why it was like pretty good on. That was like a pretty good change because it became pretty good on 80 units. And yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like the next set, Shojin's like the best item in the game.
Yeah, no, Shojin.
Which I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing for you, but
yeah,
it's
no,
like,
next
tier's
set,
gonna be super.
So Shojin's really good. Blue buff isn't as good. Blue buff is a lot more narrow. But yeah, and so like that's an example where a lot of the items, I think it was like Shojin, Bloodthirster, Gunblade, I swear Titans, right?
Yeah.
Like they've all basically become AD or AP items. Oh, Guardbreaker, Giant Slayer, right? They've all essentially become, like I talked about, they're just sort of generic plus damage for your team. Cool.
Yeah.
Right. And so like that's been the trade-off, is that we've more homogenized it, which is cool for flex, but it does make them a little less creative.
Yeah, because you kind of just slam whatever you have, and
Exactly.
it just increases your damage output. That's exactly what all those items do.
Exactly.
It just whatever makes sense better for item economy. So yeah, I guess in a sense it does make it kind of bland, I guess.
Right. And like that's fair criticism, is that in doing that, in making items more flex, it has become more bland. So
And
I'm good with the trade-off personally.
yep.
Oh, it's Dan.
Poor Dan in the dark.
Yep.
We see you.
Hi Dan. Hello Dan in the dark.
Hi.
Hey, we can hear you. You can hear us?
I probably am just going to sit most of the conversation out until the very end. So,
No, I
because
gotcha.
my signal is not consistent, so it's going to robo like every few seconds.
Hang in there. You sound really good right now. You're doing great. Okay, so this is the most controversial slide from my POV. Let's just do them in order.
Yep.
The first one, what I mean by this is if there's 3 people in the lobby who are rerolling 3 costs and they're pulling out the 3 costs, it should not, your own individual odds of hitting 3 costs should not be responsive. The reason why is because I think, well, reroll is really fun, and I actually view it as like a really healthy, necessary, important part of the game, despite a lot of bad takes on that topic. I think that we've seen time and time again that if it's like a reroll lobby, that actually does feel quite bad.
Yep.
So I think we should be trying to create barriers to the existence of a reroll lobby, and I think this is one of the big culprits of it. So I'm not sure it solves the problem completely, but I think it will help, and I think any help in that regard is worth it.
Yeah, so agree with this one. This one has been a problem that I've been trying to solve for years. We've actually taken some stabs at it behind the scenes, but any solution that we've even come close to is like extremely unintuitive, so hard to understand, and actually has had like relatively light impacts. It's like, it's slightly less favorable, yay, but now your percentages are lying to you. Cool. Like it's just like nonsense when it comes to actual intuitive solutions. But again, from a theoretical standpoint, I agree. I do think we are in the healthiest state we've ever been regarding to this problem, and the way we've accomplished that is actually by reinflating the 1 and 2 cost bags, so that like if there's like 30 or 40 copies, if people are re-rolling them, the actual help isn't really that big. So I think we are in the best state we've ever been in, but that best state is still mediocre. It's still mediocre to bad, you know? And so this has been one that like, I think I've talked about it in many Q&As over the years, but like, if someone has a magical solve to this problem, and I've seen a bunch of Redditors who come at me with like, oh, you should try this. Trust me, we've tried these solutions. They're not that good and they're not that impactful. Realistically, like we've tried some really wonky stuff where it's, for example, it's like the first 3 units of any bag that you buy aren't affected by everyone else and you can pull from them. But then once you get to the 4th unit, it starts taking impact from it. But then you're just like, huh? I don't understand these rules.
Just so I understand, why can't the simple one work? Why can't it just be that your odds are your odds for your costs, and it's pulling as if it was just starting from the beginning of the pool, and only responsive to the unit copies that you're actually personally holding? But then when you run out, right? It's like binary. It's either available in your shop or it's not.
So the reason we can't do that necessarily is because then everyone can end up playing basically the exact same comp.
Well,
Yeah, so there could be like 8 reroller, 8 like Kog'Maw reroll or something in the lobby.
Because if Kog'Mas are all appearing at the odds equal to every unit, regardless of how many people are holding them, then everyone could get like their first Kog'Maw, for example, at equal distribution.
yeah, that's true. I guess that makes denying stronger, but I'm not sure it actually creates the problem of like everyone playing the same comp, because my instinct is if you know going in there's only a certain number of units in the pool.
Right, but you only need a 2-star to really be successful. So at any given point, let's use Kog'Maw as an example, right? If Kog'Maw is as strong as he was on PBE, literally all 8 players could play Kog'Maw.
What cost is Kog'Maw?
3 cost.
3. Okay.
3 cost reroll. I mean, let's say like Kog'Maw reroll was S tier. You just hard force 7 Kog'Maw players, I guess.
But you can't. But then they're all going to be playing 2-star Kog'Maw. No, like a whole bunch of them. Like very few people are actually going to be able to hit the 3-star, because if the bag size the bag size inherently limits that, right?
Sure, but that's what I'm saying. If the perception of any particular comp is strong, right? Like we've seen that players will force it no matter what. And if the bag system is going to allow them to do that, they will, right? This is the whole players will optimize the fun out of anything.
Yeah.
And so, like, what we need to have is, like, if 3 players grab their Kog'Mas, the 4th and the 5th are much less likely to find them. That's still an inherent truth of TFT that needs to be true. Because I shouldn't talk about this, but we've also experimented with everyone just having their own bags. And like the big side effect of that was, again, like, you could just have a game where all 8 players are playing the same comp, right? And like, it just feels like absolute crap. We already get grief if like 3 people are playing the same comp in a lobby, right? And people are pissed off. So
it seems to me that if like, okay, so let's say you put all this together and it gets to like a closer to Utopia and TFT state, I feel like then the bag sizes are like, you need less protection in that area on some level, because just the idea, like for 4 costs, for example, right? If the bag sizes are 3 people can hit a 2-star, right?
Yep.
So if you go into it, even if you know that it's the strongest, if you see other people in a better spot than you, it's going to be very unlikely that it's actually correct to contest, because you're just going to wind up on the 1-star version of the board a huge percentage of the time, even though your odds of hitting it don't go down because other people's have. So you're like less behind than you normally are. It's still going to be like, hey, do I really want to be in the mix on this broken 4-cost unit with 5 players when like probably only one of us is going to hit, because a bunch of us are going to hold pairs, right? Maybe 2 of us are going to hit, right? So I feel like you still get the self-balancing.
It's possible, but then we end up with like the prisoner's dilemma situation we already see as well, right? Where it's like, let's say again, there's a 4-cost. We'll use set 12. Let's say Rise is overpowered, right? 4-cost Rise. If you're going to try to force the line, you're going to prisoner's dilemma. Hopefully everyone else gets out of your way, and if they don't, fine. But if they do, then you benefit because you've picked the strongest line, right?
Yeah,
now,
that's
to which,
part of the game.
of course. And so the natural counter is, well, then just balance better. Like, yeah, obviously we try that, right? But like, we still have to plan for it. And that's where having TFT sort of be this game where everyone can draft units. And like, the hope is that you only have so many shops. And as the bags deplete and change, the things that appear in your shop guide you along that path, right? And so we need the things that show up in your shop to be relative to what other players are playing. That is still a fundamental truth as well.
Okay, that makes sense. I totally get that. Robin, any thoughts on that topic before we move on to the next one?
Oh, we can go on the next one, I think.
Okay, so I think we did the bag size changes one essentially, right?
No,
Yeah.
we should talk about this one. We should talk about this one.
Let's talk about that
Oh,
one.
bag size change. Oh,
Yeah, let's do that one. So let's do that one. So my argument is that I actually mind less the trade-off that you're talking about, I guess. So maybe this is a personal disagreement. I mind less the trade-off of having more people in the lobby.
So that's
playing the
not
same line.
the main reason for the bag size.
Okay.
That is a
Interesting.
small part of it. The big reason is 3-star 4 costs. Straight up.
Mm.
You just need them to be less common.
Yep.
And they are less common. Way less common.
I mean, because the reality is when there were 11 or 12 copies, right? Like a lot of games, especially with how players have optimized it now, especially with all the extra resources, they're hitting those 3-star 4 costs, right? I forget what set it was, but there was a meta where like every single game was decided by who hit their 3-star 4 cost.
Yeah, I remember this.
And I remember it was freaking miserable. It was terrible. Well, and so the challenge is, if that's the case, right, then basically everything in our game, the power has to be relative to the frequency, right? And player expectation of a 3-star 4 cost is this is a game-ending, like, strong, it's a win condition. And with as common as it was, we would have had to nerf them, like, substantially, That leads to way less satisfaction, right? We need these to be, the payoff is worth it, right? And we go back to 12, I guarantee you, every single game is ending on a 3-star forecast. Every single one. I would bet my life savings on it.
I wonder how much this interacts with the other systems, though, because like my
bunch.
instinct is that that's true, but I also think augments are overtuned, and I also think inflation's a little bit out of control. So like I feel like if inflation gets reined in and augment power were to be pulled down, let's say 10 to 15%, I feel like then you still get there, but not as often. So then that's what you're after. You want it. It's actually a really fun win condition. It's like a super. You remember the games. For most players, they like remember the games of the set they got to have that moment.
Yeah, and so we've dealt with this as well. The reality is lowering the resources doesn't actually change much. All it does is it changes the breakpoints of when you play and roll down and things like that. When we've tried lowering the resources, realistically, what it just means is a much slower early game. Because people are like, if I'm going to hit that capped board, I need to econ higher. There are no aggression plays, right? By having extra economy, we create these interesting points where it's like, this game, I'm like level 6 on 3-1 instead of level 5 40 gold all the time, right? It creates different inflection points. And so the economy doesn't actually change much. And again, it still gets to the situation where the first and second place player have enough resources regardless, because one of the other dirty secrets of TFT is that the economy system is something that has been solved for about 3 years now, right? Like there isn't really interesting play around economy. It's like get to 50, get your gold up, roll down at these specific times. Occasionally you go down to 30 if you're being interesting, but like augments aren't really inflating that much. And in fact, a lot of the like econ augments aren't even really that good. Nobody's taking hedge fund, you know. So economy hasn't actually been part of the problem. That's not to say it's not completely innocent, right? Set 11 showed that encounters definitely boosted this, right? Where it's just like, here's an encounter, 20 gold. Here's an encounter, gain a bunch of XP. Like that certainly inflated things. But I think an example is like set 13. We've kind of gone back to basics for the most part. And if anything, because charms were deflating the system, we're seeing more level 10 in set 13 than we did in 12.
Yeah.
You know, and so like... If anything, what we almost have to do is build in systems to deflate inherently of themselves, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's so. I mean, this is what makes TFT so interesting, is that it's all so friggin' interconnected.
Yep. Yeah. So the bag size thing, like I said, I got a lot of flack for that. I really did. Like, I had people gunning for my throats on this one, but I promise you, this isn't just me being stubborn. It's like if you want 3-star forecasts to feel good, they have to be rare, and in order for them to be rare, we have to keep the bags this small. And even now, right? Like what's happening now is when people hit a 3-star forecast and they lose, the first thing they do is they ping me on Twitter, right? Like every single person is like, I can't believe I lost with this. This is BS. So it's like, you know.
I can't decide if the trade-off is worth it, because I think it's a really fun win con too, but I would actually be fine with like a recalibration. Maybe it's too late. Maybe like we're so deep into TFT's history, people just think it has to be this. So there's no, you actually can't experiment
right.
with
See,
it.
now this is where you get into like some more transformative, like really, like if you're talking about reformatting the definition of what a forecast is, there are ways to do that, but like, and again, this is a fake, non-real, non-future, like this is not a real thing. I'm making this up off the top of my head. But like, imagine we inserted a champion cost in between 4 and 5, right? Like then all of a sudden, cool, you could reformat something, right? Like that could be an example of how then 4 costs can come down because you've got this 4.5 thing or whatever, right? But that's, and again, that goes back to the very first thing we talked about, which is like, that's what's fun about designing TFT. It's not just the reality of what it is, but what it could be, right? Like, what if we had 10 costs of champions? What would that look like? Would that make sense? Would the game flow be good? You have to consider all of these different things. And that's where I think a reformatting could exist. But, and here's the hard part about being a designer, is that anytime you change a game like that, you create change aversion, right? You get a bunch of people going, I don't want to learn all this new shit, and they churn. And for a 5-year-old game, that's really hard to do. Thankfully, we have a player base that's already accustomed to change every 4 months. So there is room to do stuff like that, but you still have to be careful. And I'm going off on a tangent about change aversion here, but like...
No.
But even changing like the item recipe of what makes an item, right? Like I remember back when it was like Zeke's was belt plus sword, and people were like, why isn't it bow plus sword? And we actually internally tested it, and immediately everyone was like, I can't build items right. This is crazy. I don't like this. And it's like, I get it because you've been trained off these items for 5 years, and so change aversion is hard too. So it has to.
Do you know
Go ahead.
Do you know the next thing? Like, you don't have to spoil what it is, but in the back of your head, do you know what's the next like big swing you're going to take at something like
Yes.
this that's been interesting in the game for a while?
There are big swings in our future.
I mean, the new item bench is already like a change of version. I feel like for
Oh, for sure.
like yeah, like even me, like I still like sometimes I forget that I even got an item. It's just like sitting there and I don't put it on. Sometimes I'm like I hold one item and I hold it together to read what like Giant Slayer does and accidentally makes Giant Slayer, and then
right. And so any
yeah.
change
Rob
we
is so
introduce
old.
to TFT has to almost be a universal positive to be worth the change of version cost.
Yep.
Right. And like that's a big deal because there are changes we've talked about where I look at them and I'm like, yeah, this makes the game like 1% better, which means it's not worth the change of version, so we don't ship it. Right. It's like, because it's just like
the item bench makes the game way better.
Yeah.
By the way.
Yeah, that's where like the item bench is clearly better. It's not without its trade-offs, but it is absolutely an upgrade. And the first time you try to do a full transition and you have 15 items in those slots, it's like, okay, yeah, this was worth it. I'm glad this is here.
It's gonna be way better. I mean, there's been some version of this on mobile for a while. It was like the only advantage I felt like I got on mobile was like the itemization is very clean and simple. Okay, back to pillar 8, which is the last design thing, and then we have some balance ones. Balance is shorter than design. So set mechanics should be lighter in impact and create at least as many moments of skill expression as game disruption. The more I thought about this, the more I actually think you could really just distill it down to the second point, and it's not necessarily that it has to be lighter. I just think it has to be proportionate. So some set mechanics could be lighter, some could be heavier, as long as it feels like there's a lot of built into the nature of the set mechanic. There's a lot of opportunity for skill expression around it. I'm fine with that. So like for example, I'm very sad not to have put the charm set because I think this actually would rate very well for me in this from this perspective. But primarily in the mid game, I think there was a lot of very interesting decision making that was had around like when it was correct to roll and getting more efficient rolls because of the charms and all this kind of stuff. Like you can get econ back by just rolling for charms. But I think that was awesome. I think late game fell flat, and I think it was like more flat earlier and got a little bit better, but I think it was still relatively flat. But I think that's like the driving force. I know, by the way, much easier said than done. I'm not saying I have a set mechanic
I mean,
that
of
I
course,
like, but
of course.
This is like again, Utopian TFT, this is the goal.
Well, and that's the thing. Anytime you're doing a design or a product creation, right? Like having the goals is good. It's like we can align on the goals, and then the execution, like you said, can be hard. So that's fine. Like it's easy to separate those two things. As far as the goals here, it's interesting because our understanding of set mechanics has changed and is still evolving. Like we used to think set mechanics defined sets, right? It was like these are the things people come for. They add the variance to the game. They're the difference between 100 games and 1,000 games, right? Like these are the most important part of a set, and our set mechanics need to be amazing. Over time, because of all the complexity behind like origins, the fact that augments have become staple, the various other systems within the game, it's like you don't need all of that and a giant set mechanic that's going to like rack your brain and change everything.
Yes.
And so we are in the lighter in impact form as well, but players still actually like, no matter how light the set mechanic is, they still look at it and go, that's the way they identify the set, right? It still has a very strong resonance with them. So it still needs to be interesting and creative, right? And so like set 13 is probably our example of like the lightest set mechanic I think we've ever done, right? It's like on 4/6, you basically get a 4th item on a champion, right? Like that's pretty dang light, but like it still has some skill expression. But does it hit your goal here for number 2? Not really.
I think it theoretically could if it's balanced and if they're I don't know enough about them. Conceptually, I think it could if they're interesting enough, if there are enough situations where like you could like there's knowing what's good in a certain spot, knowing if a board like some amount of board recognition is like I need more damage on my board or I need more stall on my board.
Yeah,
so
that's why I think it's a moment.
Going on,
I think it's a moment of skill expression. But I don't think it creates many moments of skill expression.
But hey, this is my thing about it being interrelated. If it's light and it creates a moment for skill expression as part of it, great. That's a huge win for me. Like I think it's a little bit different.
Yep.
It's and like TFT, I come for the units and the traits first and foremost, and like there's the trait webs.
Yep.
That's what makes it so interesting. And I think that I don't know anyone who comes for the set mechanics, honestly. And I know I've like taught people TFT from the ground up. I've seen people on their journey like someone whose goals is platinum, diamond. Like I feel like I have decent exposure to the TFT experience this way, and yeah, I don't think that I think they're fine with that. Like, oh, cool, there's one fun moment at the end of the game that you like decide this thing.
Yeah, I mean, generally, like I said, players who have played, TFT for like 3 or more sets, they do sort of recognize and are excited by the set mechanic, especially in certain regions. If we have a pretty boring set mechanic, that will cost us for sure. So the set mechanic is a bit of novelty. So we do still need important set mechanics. But like I said, our how big and how impactful we've made them has definitely gone down over time. And then over time, we'll see the impact of that decision. So
Cool. Okay, coming in for a landing here, TFT Balance. And hopefully the first ones are pretty easy, right? Balance should strive to create the highest possible percentage of clickable units. I feel like that's like a fundamental tenet of
100%.
there should be relatively co-equal benefits playing Lost
We
Streak
already
and Lost
talked
Streak. I think
this.
it's a balance thing, but we've already talked about it.
Agreed.
And Pillar 3, verticals should never cap highest unless prismatic level.
Yeah, see, this is a hard one, right? Because like from a purely I need to understand how TFT works as a new player. If you tell me there are these things on the side that I get more powerful as I get more of them, but they're factually like I shouldn't be doing that, that is a complete lie to the understanding of the game, right? Like if you tell me 8 portal is bad and I shouldn't be playing 8 portal, I don't get it as a new player. And again, from a theoretical high level player and interesting point, I agree with you. But from a like approachability and understanding of TFT as a game and a product, I can't agree with you. Like
So
that's
for
the
me,
challenge.
I don't think it should be bad. It's about what caps the highest. I'm not saying a random hodgepodge of units without synergies should beat a vertical.
No, of
or it
course.
shouldn't, right? But I'm saying that like a thoughtfully played game horizontal should beat a thoughtfully played vertical because the horizontal thing was a heck of a lot more thoughtful, and that's what TFT.
But here's the challenge, right? Is like, and sorry, I'm
No, you're
jumping
good.
around in thoughts a little
No, you're
bit, but like the challenge is we talk about how information is perceived, right? And this almost goes back to like the stats conversation, right? If they go to Dish Soap's, TFT Academy tier list and they see the best things to play are not the verticals because they don't have the highest cap, then they begin to question, why are these verticals here then if I'm not supposed to play them, right? And so like even if you're saying non-optimally, and we've tried to stride for this a little bit, right? Where it's like, hey, we want to make sure that, like an easy to play vertical like Rebel or Portal last is always like low A tier. That's always
Yes.
been our goal.
Exactly.
And it's always been our goal. But even something like that, the other thing that takes into account is like the augments, right? So like I would say 8 Portal is probably low B tier unless you have an emblem. Then it's like high A tier, and it's like, and so it's like, where is it actually? Well, it depends, and it's become circumstantial. And that's been another part of the equation, right? Because now I've seen this lately over the last 2 or 3 sets, but now we're defining our tier list based off conditionals rather than consistent lines, right? Where it's like, these are now the lines that you can play if you have exactly these things, but these are the lines, and like, that's been the challenge. And it's interesting because Milk's talking about like 8 portal into 6 portal with 2 upgrade 4 costs. This is the point I wanted to talk about earlier, right? And I think Portal versus Fairy illustrates this to a T, where it's like the difference between one of those being true or not is really just a number, and that number is a damn thin line, right? Like, why wasn't 7 Fairy playable? Because the number was low. If we buffed the 7 Fairy number to a point where that number was high enough, all of a sudden the best way to play would be 7 Fairy. If we nerfed 5 Fairy enough, all of a sudden the best way to be 3 Fairy, right? And like that definition of where that line is. And this, I've thought a lot about this, Bryce, ever since like you talked about this like a month and a half ago. But like realistically, what you want for the best TFT, which would be a really cool game, to be clear. It's a different game, but it would be a cool game if like every trait was a 2 or 4. Every single trait in the game was a 2 or a 4, maybe some 2, 3, 4s, maybe some 3, 5s, but nothing bigger than 5, right? Because then all of a sudden you have these like interesting decisions, but it's not like these like 8s. Because if you look at every trait recently, I think in the past like 2 years, realistically, the lowest entry point is good, right? Let's take multi-striker. 3 multi-strikers good, 7 multi-strikers good, 5 completely fake, absolute garbage, right? Portal, 3 is okay, 8 is good, 6 is absolute garbage, right? And so it's like realistic, and I think, and if you look at 13, like Form Swapper is a really cool trait. Form Swapper is like 2 or 4. That's it. You can flex around both. It's kind of neat. And the nice thing about those being low is that it gives you a lot of room to flex around the other units, right? This is one of the reasons why I didn't really want to ship 8 Bruiser or 8 Sentinel in set 13, because when you have 8 Bruisers, it's like you pick the 4 cost carry that matches a synergy. Woo! But with 6 Sentinel, it's like, okay, well, actually, you could play like this unit and this unit, or this unit and this unit, or these 3, and it gets really interesting, and it makes the team building unique. So realistically, like I said, the optimal game that you want, and is a cool game, would be just traits like 2 to 5. That's it.
I think there is actually space. I mean, I agree with a lot of the goal, but I think there is space in my version of this for the verticals to exist and for them to be reasonably strong, right? So I don't want to do away with the verticals. I want players to have access to those. I want good players to have access to those too. Like, I think that some good versions of TFT have been when, like, you would play around a vertical and you would drop pieces of it as you hit, like, if you hit up to upgraded 4 costs, for example, or maybe 5 costs that you could play around. Like, I think that it's a good board, but it's not a great board is a pretty good archetype, because one of the skills we want to teach people in TFT is about, like, how do you cap out? And the thing is, MMR inherently balances for all of this. When you play lower elos, people play the simpler versions and they play more of the complicated version as it goes on. But by the way, when they're playing the more complicated version, it's harder. They make more mistakes. So some people might be better off just playing the simpler version and climbing their whip. It's why, like, the data on Punk was really good all the way up until, I think it was, I don't know if it was Masters or GM when Punk stopped being good.
Right, and then, like, you figure it out, yeah.
Right, but that's really interesting, right? That's a lot about the player base, and so you can create space for something like that in the game. It's like you get to have your cake and eat it too. Yeah,
I think that only really works, though, in, like, low level, right? So, like, let's say you create a 6-piece trait, or even a 7-piece trait, right? But if that 7-piece trait caps around a 5 cost, then it's still beneficial. And this is one of the other, like, design challenges. It's probably not going to come up on your thing, but one of the design principles we've been debating on our team is, like, some of our designers really want to see 1 costs on endgame boards, right? It's like, if every board is just all the 4 and 5 costs, like, yeah, that's cool, but, like, it's not really interesting because there's only so many 4 and 5 costs. And so every board ends up feeling the same, right? We need incentives to have, like, 1 cost and 2 costs and 3 costs on the board. The way you do that is powerful verticals as well. I think the world you're describing is, like, imagine there's a 5 or a 6 piece that uses, like, the 1s and the 2s and the 3s and the 4s, and then, like, the 4 is capped, like, but again, like, the 4 is really good, and so you play 6, then ditch the 1s and add the 5s, right? Like, that's really what you're describing. But in order for that to be true, again, it's like the trait, it's always the power trade-off of the trait and the 1 cost versus the 5 cost, right? Like, that's really what it comes down to. It's a math balance of what makes your army stronger. But again, if a player is told, hey, you know that 6-piece trait you're running? What you're supposed to do is cut 2 of it and add these. That melts their brain at first, right? And that's why, to me, like I said, the optimal game is actually probably something where it's like, no, you want to max it out at 5, that's good, and then add powerful units, that's good too, right? Like, signaling to the player that the max of a thing they should chase is a good thing is kind of a, like, clear communication point that really helps every player. And it's tough to figure that out. But that's why, like I said, I think there's an optimal version where it literally is just like mix and match 2s and 4s and things like that. So,
yeah, it feels like, I don't know, maybe I haven't thought about game design anywhere near the level that you have. So I feel like I have to defer to your expertise on this, but it does, like, my instinct is that it's okay to have the verticals be, like, I guess, slightly misleading in this regard, where it's like it's pretty accurate for a while, right? As you're learning the game, you learn it to be accurate. You learn that like playing the 7 version of it's good, and then eventually you hit a ceiling where it's like, okay, people can do this better. And by the way, that ceiling is really high, actually, like really high. Like, we're talking about the experience in, like, Challenger. Like, you can play. Robin has been playing Flowchart TFT for years and is one of the best players in North America, right? We put him, like, 6 on our all-time NA list, right?
Yeah, and this is one where I think we're just going to have to disagree because, like I said, to me, fundamentally, the point is if there is a vertical, a player says, I want to chase the vertical, but when a Dish Soap or a Robin guide is saying, no, you're supposed to cut the vertical, the actual new players are sort of like, I don't get it. Brain melted.
But that's fine, right? Like, the thing is that their elo, they're not experiencing anyway. No one's doing it.
Right, but see, I'm saying that's not fine, right? Like, you're saying it's fine, and I'm saying it's not, right? Because then it's like, wait, but then how am I supposed to play the game? I don't get it. They want to learn, and having a clear path to learning is important, and they need it to be the truth, right? Like, having an 8 portal that is good that a player can go, hey, if you're learning the game, just buy all the portal units, and it'll do good. That's really important. That's really important.
Okay, I feel that it makes sense.
I guess an example from last set, I guess, like, what the example that Milk said. Would you say, Mortdog, that 6 portal was too weak, or Like, why didn't people drop 2 units to play 6 portal plus 2 forecast?
Yeah, so
Two big
this is why I'm
forecast.
saying like I don't like middle traits, because middle traits are just traits on the way to the big traits. All a 6 portal buff does is buff 8 portal.
What if, and then if you, let's say you buff 6 portal but nerf 8 portal,
Then you're
8
not
portal
supposed to ever
becomes
play 8, and then we're back to the line to the
Yeah.
player. Right? And this is why I'm saying I actually
Yeah.
right now I hate middle traits. I hate them so much.
Is there a world where there could be, I guess it's impossible. Like, what if it's like 2, 4, and then 8?
Yeah, no, I think something like that is possible.
Skip a middle trait?
And
Oh,
hilariously
really?
enough,
Damn.
if you go back to like set 1, we used to have 3 6s, right? Like Noble was a 3/6. And that was cool, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
I think that's fine. That's why I'm actually kind of trying to shift us a little bit back from like every trait needs to be a 2 4 6 8. You know, like we don't need everything to be like that maxed out because it really does limit the board.
and it
So
creates different play patterns too, playing around different spikes in terms of like how you transition and win.
but realistically, like every 3 5 7 we have in the set right now, the 5 is just the path to 7. That's it. Unless
How
the
do
7
you
is poorly tuned, in which case it's just ignore the 7 like Fairy.
How do you respond to this person in chat who said higher cost unit equals stronger units is pretty intuitive? The idea being like, why are we prioritizing that traits are intuitive relative to cost? Doesn't it make sense that it's like, hey, 1 cost?
Yep.
Thank you for doing all this stuff early, but I have access to more powerful shit now. So
Yeah.
why, like, if in D&D, or any game, you're using your highest level spells, right?
So I'm going to have Robin answer this, which is really funny. Hey, Robin, when you stream, what unit do people tell you to put in? The one that makes your trait web bigger, right?
Oh, yes.
Every time
Yes.
they'll be like, why are you playing 3 bruiser when you could be playing 2 bruiser, 2 this?
Yeah,
Right?
3 bruiser, 3 emissary, Keck W or something.
Right.
I mean, 3
They
emissary is Keck W,
always
but...
fixate on the traits, right? Because to them, the traits are the important thing. That is just how the game has been communicated. And like I said, any streamer will tell you your entire chat is always going maximize that trait web. But the actual play, we know if you have 3 2-star bruisers, you play 3 2-star bruisers, right? Like that is absolutely the correct play, but your chat will flame you for it. And that's why, like,
but then you get to flame them back more.
Of course. And I'm happy that the optimal play is to play 3 bruiser, but I'm telling you that that's just not how players comprehend our game, right? And so it's very hard. Like, if we wanted the unit power to be more important than the trait power, we have to do a lot in how we communicate to the player. Like, a dumb example here would be, imagine if at the top of the trait web, we put a thing on the top that said army cost, right? And like that was the most important number. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, I made my army cost go from 80 to 85. Okay, cool. Now I'm starting to see that, like, as long as my army cost is higher, that's really important. And so I see why you're playing 3 bruiser, because it made your army cost higher. Great. Now, obviously that has trade-offs because, oh, my 102 gold comp lost to their 93 gold comp. Game's bad. Like, there's trade-offs here. But that's what I'm saying about communicating what is important in the game. And this is the important part about UX and design and stuff like that. But again, I'm telling you, any streamer will tell you that, like, players fixate on that trait web more than anything.
Huh. That makes tons of sense.
And True Bis and Ginsu's.
Astral Bis.
Thank God I'm not streaming.
I also play a lot of deck building games, and I think that the journey of TFT is very similar to deck building. I think it's a really easy layup, right? If you play a game like Slay Aspire or Bellagio recently, you kind of have similarities to TFT. And whenever I teach deck building games to my wife or other friends, they're so reluctant to sell the things that help them get there. And I think that's part of the 1 cost journey that Mort's kind of describing a little bit, which is like, let's say you're playing a card that helps scale your entire deck. And that's kind of like playing the verticals. They hate removing that from the deck. They hate selling that Joker. Or they hate doing all that stuff. Because to them, it's sort of compromising the entire story of the game. And that's actually a really big part about TFT that I think a lot of people kind of forget, is that a lot of the top level players are always thinking about the end, like, snapshot, not thinking about the player journey, not just from like a learning experience of getting better at the game, but also the confined one singular game experience. And if we lose that story aspect of it, it's like a really big part that hooks TFT in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Completely agree. Okay, home stretch on this, Mort. Pillar 4. This is about the relative popularity of reroll to non-reroll in a lobby. I'm not wedded to these exact numbers, but the idea is roughly 5 non-rerollers, roughly 3 rerollers should be the goal from a balance perspective. My argument is that the game plays best when you have stylistically flexible options. But I think that once you get past 3 rerollers in a lobby, it starts to feel really bad, especially since it's all internally incentivized. So it is a snowball.
Mostly agree here. I would say 5 to 8 tempo players and 0 to 3 reroll players.
Okay.
I'm actually okay with a lobby where there's no rerollers.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I do think rerolling should be an option. But one of the other things I really hate is like what I don't want is people sending me screenshots going, look, there's 8 players, game's bad. And it's like, no, they just all chose to not play reroll.
Right.
But but I also don't want 6, 8, or 8 rerollers. Like that's bad too. What I want is people to play what they want and feel comfortable and not feel like they're forced into a particular line. And that's kind of the higher level version is like, as long as there are reroll comps viable and fast 8 comps that are viable, good, we did it. With the one asterisk being, I still really hate that we call 3 cost comps reroll comps. I really hate that, but it is what it is, and that's how players call it. So,
yep, that makes sense. I mean, the play pattern for 3 cost reroll is completely different than 1 and 2 cost reroll. 1 and 2 cost share a lot more in common.
Yep.
3 cost is weird individual style. It's not really actually interrelated to any of the other ways you play TFT.
Yep.
Okay, Pillar 5. This one might be very controversial. The more I've played augments, the less I have liked them. I think that it's really complicated. I'll try to do it succinctly, but there's a bunch of things. 1, I think that they're too deterministic. I think they push you towards a line way too high a percentage of the time. 2, I think in general, the opportunity for skill expression on an individual augment decision is actually quite a bit lower than I intuitively thought it was going to be going in. I thought, wow, these are cool, impactful moments. You're going to be really put to the test. But actually what it's become, and this is hugely stats related, and maybe stats getting away from this will change this dynamic, but it just feels like the worst version of a TFT knowledge check. Like TFT knowledge is heavily tested for in a bunch of ways. You have to know like which units are stronger, which items are stronger, who they're strong on. Like you get so much value out of already playing a patch or playing a set that I'm not sure like adding these acute moments in the game that are this impactful is worth it, especially since they're so damn hard to balance. I mean, there's a reason why they get like silver augment band of variance is a lot more narrow than gold and prismatic because the higher in power level you're offering on average, the more you feel the pain from an outlier good or an outlier bad. And so I just don't love the experience of playing with them at present. I do think they should stay in the game, but my argument is I think that 1, you should be offered more generics on stage 2 so that you have a little bit more flexibility in general. If you like don't want to commit, you have that option. You're gonna have that option. I'm not committing right now.
Yep.
Right. And 2, I think overall augment power should be reduced by, I'm not sure what it is, 10%, 15%, 20. I could be talking to a bunch of different numbers, but I think it needs to come down.
You're pulling numbers out of your ass, but that's fine.
Exactly.
I get it. Like
exactly.
You want power down. Okay, this is a really complicated topic. Augments should be impactful, true, but should dictate line of direction lower. This one's trickier because remember how earlier we were talking about how like audiences have different preferences? I think for the challenger level play, you're absolutely right? Like if we made a bunch of generic augments, but even then I will say like if you design the most generic augment in your head, right? Your team gains 20% attack speed. Okay. And now design another generic augment. Your team gains 400 health. And let's assume those numbers are balanced. It might be 3, like, let's just assume we have an HP 1 and an attack speed 1, and those 2 are balanced, right? Even that decision probably just dictated your line, right? Like, straight up, like, if you take the attack speed 1, you're probably not playing a Sentinel comp. If you take the health 1, you're probably not playing a Challenger comp, right? Like, that already has dictated that line to some extent.
It to some extent, and I just to interrupt because this goes back to the tree thing we did earlier.
Yep.
Right. It should narrow possibilities for sure. Right. That's part of it, but it should be a slow and steady narrowing of possibilities. So when you go from all the possibilities in the game to one possibility in the game at the beginning, that's like the worst case scenario.
Right. Now here's the challenge though. You're believing that players are rational, right? Even in that example I just used. If we take hyperbolic TFT knowledge sharing to what it normally is, it probably just dictated the line, right? It's like you would never play this attack speed 1 with the Sentinel 1. Like that's just completely suboptimal. Just imagine Milk talking about it right now, right? Like the words coming out of his mouth, which then perpetuate to the players are, this is the thing. And so like, it kind of like the item system, right? We can make those generic augments, but the more we do, the more boring they are. And so the more we try to make them interesting and unique, the more likely it is to probably sort of guide you to a specific line. That's kind of just going to be a fundamental truth. The other aspect of augments that has become really important that players like is that augments create the unique experiences from game to game, right? Like the first time you play a built different game is a very different experience than the first time you play your first Wandering Trainer game, or you play your first hard commit game, or your first hero augment game, right? Like, these are the unique experiences that generally a lot of our players, not all, but a lot of our players are trying to go after. It's like, I can't wait to have my birthday present game. I can't wait to have my whatever game, right? Like, they kind of are those unique experiences. And so, like, if anything, we've been trying to make more of them that are like, here's this really cool way to do it, right? Phil cooked freaking Hall of Mirrors, which is wild and crazy, but it's like players want those unique experiences that keep them coming back and keep them playing the game. So I think we're never going to be able to get away from those, and I think it would be a really bad call to get rid of those. Now, the stats part of this equation, and this is where it gets complicated, and this is where I'm going to say stuff that chat's going to hate me for. It's fine. It is what it is that we have seen time and time again that context matters with augments. We have seen time and time again that world champions take bad augments in the right situation, use them well, and win the game. It is what it is, right? And what we have dreamed for augments is when you understand how these augments are supposed to be used, you can do really cool things with them, even if they're sitting on a 4.7, 4.8, right? Probably the best example of this right now is Trait Tracker. If you look at Trait Tracker in the data, it's garbage. It's garbage at all levels. It's like 4.9, 5.0. But like, if I told Robin, is Trait Tracker a good augment?
It's broken. It's OP.
See? Right? Like, because Robin understands the context of when it's good, right? One of the new augments we just came out with, Golemify. In our data and the external data before we get pulled it down, it was sitting at like a 6.0. And it's like, yeah, because nobody knows how to use it. But the second I tell you, hey, you're only supposed to take this augment if you're running 4 Bruiser early and have slammed a bunch of HP and AD items, and then you end up with a 9,000 Golem and you win the game, everyone will go, it's broken if in this exact spot, right? It's narrow and whatever. Like, people need to understand the context. Now, where I might be being naive here, and this is where like TFT might just be too complicated a game, right? Is that maybe I'm naively hoping that the goal is for players to learn the context of when the augments are good, understand them, and then kind of like what you were saying is understand the lines of when they can play them, right? It's like, oh, this is a situation where I could take Golemify. This is great. Or this is, but the reason I say naively is because that might just be too much. That might just be too goddamn much that like 5 players on the planet can do that in context without stats, right? Like maybe Dish can do it. Maybe a couple others, maybe Tidal can do it. But like, and I mean this with respect, I'm not actually being mean to Milk here, but like, that's not Milk's strength, right? He can't learn the context of every single augment. That's just not what he's good at. And if someone like Milk can't do it, how can I expect 95% of our players to do it, you know? Like, it might just be too much.
And that's actually a huge part of my argument more, is that I think that in theory, these decisions sounded like they were going to be impactful, but in progress, in like actuality, how it feels is like stats gave us a lot of information about how augments actually play. So it's really just like, you know, or you don't know. And I don't think there's a whole lot of intuition that actually comes into it most of the time. There are interesting moments for sure, though. There was a great moment of this where I think it was a Degree who did a post wrap on his recent, and he talked about like why he chose a suboptimal augment in the data in his like first game or something. It was really good. So there are moments for sure. I just think it doesn't happen often enough in a way that a player could theoretically perceive.
Yeah, and like I said, that's just what I'm like. The dream is like a player looks at an augment, maybe spends some time and sort of goes, when would, I'm going to keep using Golemify as an example, but it's like, when would this be good? When is a situation where Golemify would be good? I like, rather than just going, it's 5.7, it's terrible, it's always terrible, at least understanding where it might be good. But again, there's also like 240 augments. So like, maybe that's too much. And interestingly enough, I've been spending a lot of time in the anomaly data, you know, the last 2 days. Sure. And the anomalies that are being picked right now, it's very interesting because like the top 5 picked augments are like the safest, most bland, most boring choices. The number 1 picked anomaly is the one that's like, you can now execute for 15%.
Yes.
You know?
I always take that. But I don't even know if it's good.
Right. I'm not saying it's good. It's actually middle of the road for data.
Yeah, I feel like it's not that good. But
right. It's just safe. Right.
It makes sense to me. Yeah.
Right. And this is what I'm saying. It's like there's like a learning curve that honestly, this is where like TFT might just be too hard a game. Right. It's like, and that's where I think we're trying to figure out what exactly is the like, we want to give you the puzzle to solve, but we also don't want you to just go, quick, give me the answer sheet, right? We want you to go on that journey of discovery. It's much like, Frodan was just equating it to Slay the Spire. It's like we want to have that journey of discovery, but, not everyone wants that. A lot of people want to rush to the answer. They want the strategy guide,
Yep. Last one, Mort. And this is a doozy of one. And to be clear, when I say on average, unit power should be stronger than trait power.
I mean, we've talked about this, so
yeah, it's just moving the slider is all I want. I don't want it slammed all the way. I don't want it to be full verticals. Full horizontal. I don't want verticals to be useless. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. I just think moving some power back into units. You were right. It did create some of these play patterns early on that like units were OP. I actually think that's healthy on some level for the game.
I think if you look at set 13 so far, and Robin, back me up here, or tell me I'm wrong, is that set 13 has kind of done this, right? Like, we went back and it's like the 5 costs are all pretty damn strong. And in fact, the couple that weren't literally just got buffed again, where it's like, make sure they are strong. Like, Savika's kind of a beast by herself. The 4 costs are pretty dang strong too. Would you agree, Robin?
I don't know if it's like just the beginning of the set or there's no stats, but I feel like set 13, it prioritizes unit strength over trait strength. But I don't know if it's because it's always like this during PvE. I forget, but like I'd rather play like a unit, a good quality 4 cost, 5 cost over like the next trait for this set.
Yeah, and it's not always true, right? Like, but I think like, for example, 6 pit fighter versus 4 pit fighter and better units, there's more of that conversation in there. So I'm agreeing with you, Bryce, that like, for example, set 12, the slider was in the wrong place, but I am still drawing that line of, if a player learns that they're not supposed to play the vertical, we've gone too far, right? Agree. And as long as we have verticals, that kind of has to be true. Whether or not we should have verticals, that's a whole other discussion. But I think that has to be true. And I will say again, and I'm this isn't some weird hashtag ad or anything, but like set 13, we explicitly tried to make sure that like everything was strong, so that there would be a lot of like, so a lot of that power is in the unit power because everything needed to be strong,
Cool. I feel like the more I learn about set 13, the more I feel like it's a set I would really enjoy playing.
I mean, real talk, Bryce. I know why you're stepping out. I know you've got life stuff and stuff like that, but I listen to a lot of these shows. I listen to a lot of the feedback, and I am trying to find that line. I spend a lot of my time working with other people on the team, understanding our audience. And when I say understanding our audience, I mean like all of our audience. There are different regional tastes. There are different subsectional tastes. Like, some players want to copy their streamer and play their one trick. Some people want to be flex play. Like, some people, like, the idea of flex play repulses them, but they're still like a large portion of our audience, and I need to understand that, right? And what I'll say is, like, there are things in this conversation here that, like, in the future, if TFT is going to be around for years to come, we can't just sit here and be like, it's another set. It's another set. It's another set, right? Like, even set to set to set, I look at like 10, 11, 12. It's like, yeah, those are sets, but like, where's the innovation? Where's the like the big, because like TFT is a game where as soon as it gets, I think Boxbox actually said this when he was talking about stats removal, where he's like, as soon as the game is solved, it's boring. And like, we're going to have to take some swings so that the game doesn't get solved and the game isn't boring.
I just like the idea of the game being so hard that it can't be solved.
Right.
That's my utopia, really.
Right, and I agree. And that's why, going back to the stats thing, it's like, I don't need the game being solved by a machine, especially when it's not actually solved. It's just solved.
It's the perception of solved, which is way worse than being actually solved. If it's actually solved, then everybody's like on theoretically equal footing, and it's like fair reaction stuff. But when it's fake solved, then everyone just freaks out about it. It's so painful.
Well, and when it's fake solved, 95% of people aren't having fun because they think it's solved.
Exactly.
And that's really dangerous here. So,
yes. Robin or Dan, any thoughts before I kind of close out this segment?
Well, I think you cooked really hard on some of these topics. I really liked the way you backed up a lot of your philosophy on design and balance. I feel a lot of what you're talking about in set 13. I honestly think the trait web is goated. I think form swappers and emissaries do so much for the game. Even though Gangplank was giga busted on PvE, I had so much fun playing it because I'm just like, all roads just leads to like this guy anchoring my board and I can flex around him. And I end up having way more fun playing PvE this set than any other PvE session because I really feel like trait webs, you guys did really well. I don't think anomalies I think anomalies are really scary in general. I think what you described is like it's just like a 4th item. I'm not sure that's actually going to be true in practice. I think you're going to be bug squashing pretty much all set, as we saw with like Hogmaw and GP and a few others. But great discussion, and I'm thankful that you're able to spend time. Thanks.
Yeah,
Robin,
the
thoughts?
one other thing I'll talk about, which, because Milk kind of brought it up briefly, is, we talk about like balance quality, and like, I'm not going to lie, like set 12, definitely one of our like not great balance. But one of the things that we don't talk about behind the scenes is like, TFT's been around for 5 years. The people balancing the game have not been the same for 5 years, right? People come, people go. You train new people, you try new things. If you ever want to talk to like someone like a Nico, he took a stab at it. It's like, and a lot of people didn't believe me at first when I used to say stuff like this, because they're just like, oh, Mort's the balance guy, so of course he says balance is hard. But over time, I've kind of proved that I can do any type of design at Riot. But the reality is I can do pretty much any type, but balancing this game is the freaking hardest balance in the world. And the thing, like, Milk will call us out on like, well, why did you make this wrong change? Why did you make... It's like, he's not wrong, but what he's ignoring is the fact that in any particular patch, there are like 400 pieces of content, right? We have all the augments, all the traits, all the champions, all the items. And it's like, we might be adjusting 50 or 60 of them, and 55 of those might be correct and good changes that are doing good things. 4 of them might be close enough, and 1 might be really bad, right? And it's like, but that 1, because of how interconnected TFT is like catastrophic, right? It's absolutely catastrophic.
Yep.
The entire set 12 launch was ruined because we basically made 1 change to 1 champion at the last minute to their animation speed, right? And it's like, great, cool, all that hard work down the drain, and the poor team that worked on I was moving. The poor team that worked on it tried their best and get like absolutely shit on because an animation changed, right? Like, fuck. So if anybody thinks they can do better, like, cool. But I'm telling you, and you can ask Aniko, you can ask Keaton, you can ask anybody else who's tried to do this, it is fucking hard.
Yeah. I guess last episode I was like, I honestly can't name a single game that's harder balanced than TFT, at least not with how they're shipping content, right? Like, if I gave you a set for a year and a half, I'm sure you could get it pretty damn close to perfect, right? But that's just unreasonable. That's just not how it works. So, I mean, look, from my perspective, I did this in a Agree format because I thought it would be the more interesting, like, sounding board format, but hopefully it felt more like a question asking and discussion than anything else, because the reality is you have so much more information in your brain about this topic than anyone on planet Earth, and so just the opportunity to, like, try to pull it out and play devil's advocate at times is really fun.
I'm trying not to like toot my own horn here. I'm really not, but like, I don't think
you're allowed
people
to toot your own horn roughly 100,000x more than you do.
Yeah, I don't think people realize like how much my mind is like always on this subject. It is such a deep and complicated subject, and again, that's ignoring just what is, right? Like, you could spend all the time in the world thinking about what is, but I have to think about what could be, all the possible permutations of the future. And it's just like, where is this game going to be in a year? Where is this game going to be in 2 years? How is it going to be? Like, how are players like Bryce? How am I going to get Bryce to come back? How am I going to keep Robin interested? How am I going to keep Milk from freaking out the next time? Like, all of this shit is like constantly just being joked. How are we going to make sure that we have enough monetization? How are we going to, like, that is the game. And it's just so goddamn much. And talking a lot, sorry, I'm getting a little rambly here because it's late and I'm tired, but it's like, and that's all while I'm dealing with like set 13. Like today, you know what we did? We played set 14, and then I've got set 15 coming up, set 16, set 17 are all being worked on right now. Pretty soon we have to start planning for set 18. It's like, holy shit. And that's not even combining, like, we've got things for the store for, I can't say that thing, and I can't say that thing, and like, so like, it's so goddamn much. And then when someone comes at me and they're like, yeah, but Callista probably shouldn't have been nerfed. Like, yeah, you're probably right. My bad. And I'm not even including, like, hey, you know, like, I had to take the kids to school today because my wife was sick, blah, 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 blah. Life is hard, wham, 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 Mort. I get it. But TFT's a fucking hard game. That's it.
I think you're entitled to that, honestly. I think, and at times, whenever, I always get frustrated sometimes. I'm not saying you handle every situation perfectly. You do not. I think you would admit that.
Oh,
but
well,
I think
no.
a lot of the time you handle something in reaction. It's like the straw that broke the camel's back, and it's just been like weighing on you increasing amounts, and like it just eventually I would snap too. I don't want your role, and part of the reason why I've always been, I think, protective of you, I guess is a fair way to put defensive. I'm not sure the right way to put it, but like, I've always tried to play that role in the community on some level because I just think people can be so unreasonable in expectations, and like, perfection is not the goal. You're incredible at your job, as is the overwhelming majority of your team. I don't know everyone. You're in a way better spot to evaluate that. But TFT is a pretty magical game, and this is all at the end of the day like pushing on the bounds of trying to make the game the best it can be. and to do everything you're doing, juggle it all and do it all so well, and then also be willing to come and have this conversation with us. It's just really, it's so above and beyond, man. It's so far beyond what we could reasonably expect.
And
of
like
you,
I said,
I deeply appreciate it.
No problem. I just want you guys to have fun with the game. We all do. We all want you to have fun with TFT, and we want to keep making you smile, and we want to get Dan's power back, and those are the things that matter. So
I agree.
TFT is the best game ever invented.
Yep,
it's pretty good.
I've been saying it. Also, yeah, like more. Come on, like look how far TFT has come since set 1. Now we're in set 13. The game has like grown exponentially. You know, the player base has gone up. Like, I'm pretty sure you guys are making way more money. The revenue's gone up. So, I mean, you did a great job. So
I wish Riot would brag more about our goddamn numbers. I really wish they would.
I wish that too. That would be good data.
I noticed on Riot Games Twitter that it's I don't know if it's always been like this, but it's at League of Legends and then at TFT second. I think they changed it. I think it was like after like Valorant or like Arcane or I think it was after Runeterra actually. And then I think they prioritized us.
Hey, we take those.
Was there any more
it.
to this slide? I mean, we kind of
That's it. No,
Okay.
we've done this one, and that's the whole section. So thank you so much for that. It was I really enjoyed it.
So last thing I'll say, Bryce, is if I haven't gotten you back by early 2026 at the latest,
I love this as a goal because if you're bringing me back, everybody's winning.
There's some cooking that I think you'll like the recipe.
I cannot wait. And I'm not, even though I'll be taking a step back from like being plugged in and doing what I do for the scene, at least at present, there's no way I'm ever like fully going away. I'm too invested in the human. So
I know. I feel like you'll be paying attention on the side regardless.
I will for sure. I'll be aware of what people think about the set. And if enough chirping reaches my ear that it's the greatest of all time for real and it's a standard deviation above, and here's why. There's certain people that I'll listen to. Like if Ramblin tells me to come back, that's very interesting. I know the people that like the things they like about TFT overlap with mine.
I think there are things we're cooking that will even make Ramblin happy.
Love that.
And I know what Ramblin like. Like Ramblin's another one that like I know what he likes, I know what he doesn't, I know where we've ticked him off. I get it. But I think there are some things even like he's gonna be like, wait, really? They did this? Woohoo!
Man,
are you making something that Milk would like?
I don't care.
Oh, that's impossible. What do you mean? What do you mean?
Look at this.
I think
we're making this show happen through rain and storm and sleet and hail and wind.
Yeah, this is, and it's so funny. It's so funny that we're all in the same. We all have 3 of us happen to be in Washington, so we all went through the exact same thunderstorm.
Yeah, my power flickered while I was sitting here listening to Milk earlier. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for not just for doing this, but for like moving over your channel and hosting it so we can continue the conversation. Really appreciate it. Much love to Robin as well for being our guest. You've been one of our favorite guests, and it's been so fun to have you on each and every time. Sorry this one was a little different and got like way off out there, but you were awesome throughout as always. And yeah,
I think Robin deserves major props here for going through this entire thing. So.
Oh no, I enjoyed it. I had nothing to do today, and I already streamed today, so I have nothing to do, so I wouldn't be doing anything. So thanks for having me. I always enjoy these podcasts, and when I miss it, I always listen to it on in my car. It's sad that it's going away, but I'm sure it'll come back in the near future. I'm excited for set 13. Into the Arcane chat.
Any final thoughts from you about any of the conversation in the show? Anything?
No, I mean, like I said, I like talking about these topics. The problem is, it's like when I stream, I'm like in the middle of a game and people are coming at me with 100 questions. I have to do them short. But it was actually kind of nice to show like the deeper side of me, the analytical side. Like, I don't think that side gets shown that often. So that was kind of cool. So if anything, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. But like I said, TFT is such a unique game, and that's why like even though I've been working on it for so damn long, it's like there's still so much to do, right? Like this is such a wide problem space. It's so interesting. So, and like I said, Bryce, I mean, you know, this might be the last time I talk to you about for a while. Like I mean, I get it, but also like come back, you know.
I hope so.
Come back when
you're ready. I have
ready.
a lot of deep love for this game. This game is so much more than a game to me on so many levels. So hopefully I will be back in the future. Until then, keep crushing it, and thank you so much.
One more because Azir asked for it. Fuck yeah!
All right, so we're going to fast forward and jump about a week and a half later because in case you guys don't know what happened, it was super chaotic. My power went out because a literal like hurricane hit Seattle and knocked out. It was kind of like a natural disaster level of destruction to the power lines and the grid. Like basically, Washington had to grab a bunch of power teams from Oregon, from Canada, from California to come save us. So I was out of power for a few days. But we're back and we're here to wrap it up with sort of like a bonus section of our last episode, Bryce. So I guess welcome back again.
Welcome back again. I will not die. All this is gonna do is drag out the like this guy won't retire memes,
Yeah.
which I'm here for that. Fuck it, sounds
Yeah.
great. But I think this probably is actually like done for a little while.
It is. I mean, part of me was like, well, if I never actually record this, I could keep Bryce in limbo forever. But we should get it done, especially because Macau's coming up, and I feel like that's going to be yet another big chapter coming up, both for everybody involved as well as TFT, because you're not going to be at Macau. That bums me out, man. But you know, I'll just say it, like it'll be a lot worse of an experience for me without you there. And I know that you didn't necessarily have like the best time co-streaming it, but I would have loved to even just, you know, turn around and see you commentating on stage and everything like that. It would have been a really cool moment.
Yeah, I would have loved to have done it. I think that was the nail in the coffin for me was when I wound up turning down Macau. It was just so clear for me that if I'm not going to Macau, it's kind of like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's the exact event that I want to be at. Everyone's going to be there. It's going to be so fun. Vegas was amazing. I've never been to Macau. Like it just sounds like such a fun time being there. But there's just no way. And it's further, I mean, where we're at in our lives, it's like further, it's very clearly the correct decision. I think if me trying to leave, and when is it? It's in like 2 weeks or something.
No, we're leaving next week. It's
Yeah,
actually
me
so
trying-
soon.
No shot. Even if I committed to it, I might have to pull out at this point, honestly, if I had. So yeah, I don't know. It's I'm very sad to not be there. I will definitely tune in the background. I can't wait to see what happens. I'm sure it'll be amazing.
By the time this releases, it actually might be like the day before Macau. So
Love that.
we'll see. But hopefully you're able to at least watch it, and you know maybe you'll like, you know, splash into future co-streams every now and then. I'm imagining if Disso wins the second Worlds, we'll call you, right? Like
I'm always in the background. I'm always I have so many rooting interests, right? I'm such a genuine fan of so many people in the scene, mostly from NA, but a few outside as well that I you know, I really enjoy watching their career.
for sure.
So yeah, I'll always know what's going on. If cool shit is happening, I could see myself ducking by every once in a while. Maybe I'll get a sabbatical at some point and come back for a short period for real. We'll see.
All right. So let's pick up where we left off, as much as our memory can at least suffice here, because we were talking about the utopian TFT state, and it was a little bit jumbled because again my stream kept dropping. Apologies, but thankfully Mortdog was hosting it. I want to ask, and you were kind of saying at the very end how you were really appreciative of more, but now that you've had some time to process and digest it, you know, do you feel like that conversation leads you to be in a hopeful state of like where TFT is, or do you feel like you're still in the same spot? Because very candidly, you know, part of the reason why you brought this up was because there was a lot of things about TFT design and balance that you were unhappy with, which makes the decision to step away a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, I left that conversation very hopeful, but then that sucks because I won't be around to enjoy it. So you know, neutrally hopeful, and I'm bummed. And maybe Mort made a comment about he expects to pull me back within a year and a half or something like that. So maybe he will. We'll see. If he makes a set that's that good, maybe I'll come back and find a time to play. Maybe I'll force a sabbatical then. But the conversation itself was amazing. I really enjoyed hearing Mort's perspective. We did not agree on everything, but I guess what I would say, bigger picture of that conversation, like if I had to TLDR it, it would probably be something along the lines of there's a lot of goal alignment. I think that they actually really do want to incentivize some of the things that I love about the game, specifically like playing flexibly, stylistically flexibly within the lobby, reducing commitment, increasing opportunities for player skill expression. I think they actually are interested in a lot of that. And some of that's learnings off recent sets, but I also think some of it might have just been actually that they've been struggling to balance TFT for a little bit. And that when you couple that with the level to which they remake augments and the set mechanics being as large as they are, I just think it's tough. So I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. I'm rambling already.
Yeah, no, I mean that ramble away. We have as much time as we really need here. And to that point, I think I made a prediction at the end of the episode as well with my very little internet connection, because the cell phone service was also dropping as I was actually on the call. But I did say that they did bring some of those elements back. This set, I feel like there are a lot of really interesting, flexible things you can do. There's a lot of splash trades and really neat things you can do within certain trees, like Black Rose and Emissary. But I did also predict that I think that this set's going to be a lot of bug squashing of OP interaction with anomalies. And that is actually happening. But one thing really fascinating about it, Bryce, is that everyone is still having a lot of fun. There's like a lot of broken stuff. I don't know if you were paying attention, but there was an actual game-breaking bug where someone would, if you got a cleanse effect on Gangplank with his frontline version, and you picked an anomaly that said you would cast every 4 seconds, that cast every 4 seconds was a debuff, so Gangplank would cleanse it and instantly cast, and then since he would cleanse it again and instantly cast, so basically permacast. And some people were just literally bug abusing and spamming this to like, early masters.
Yeah, and they ban waved them, right?
They ban waved them, exactly.
Hell yeah.
And yet, despite that happening, it almost feels like people already have forgotten it, and like people are just going back to having fun. And I think ultimately, and this might actually tie into one major section left that we're gonna do here, which is kind of an agree. But I still think at its core, yes, balance is important. Yes, all design stuff, but I think people still just really want to have fun in TFT, and if they bring back more of that fun elements, I can't see this game going anywhere. I feel like it's just so important that at its core, TFT is fun, because the broken stuff is actually part of it. Like, that's part of what we kind of love if you actually really think about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you and I had this debate a bunch about the way in which TFT people in general remember previous sets and like remember previous patches and the ways, and it's a great example of this, right? Which is it is easy to put on the rose-colored glasses if there's enough fun going on. Like for me, if there's enough fun on a patch, if there's enough room to cook on a patch, I'm happy, even though I always know there's going to be some broken shit, right? Like that's part of TFT, but the game self-balances because you're pulling from the same pool of units. And so there's always, as long as there's space to do some other stuff that's fun and interesting, great. And that's the thing. I don't need them to like, my utopian TFT is not like, turn the skill expression up to the absolute limit and like it basically eliminate the ability for a casual player to have fun in this game. That's not what TFT is about at all. My point is just I think we could pull slightly more in that direction in a way that does not at all disrupt this much larger set of the player base that's playing more for fun than they are playing for like ultimate peak skill expression.
Sure. I think the challenge is that I think they can get there. Can they get there quickly? Right? Is it going to be at the end of the sets? Can they do it consistently? It feels like it happens once every other set, once every 3 sets now. I'm optimistic though about set 13. The current state of the patch is that it's probably one of the like it took 3.5 patches there. They did like a C patch and half of a D patch, but it's actually in a pretty decent spot, even though there's some pretty big egregious outliers of like some reroll comps, but it's in a really decent spot. So I too remain optimistic. And I really appreciate Mort laying it down too, because he just loves talking about this conversation. He's such a nerd about game design.
He's such a nerd. It was spectacular. I think I would be curious if Mort has done something that went deeper on like TFT theory than that publicly. I'm not sure that he has. Not that comprehensively, at least. He's talked about
around it.
He's covered these topics in a lot of ways, but that's part of what made this segment so fun. Is I was like, it's very clear that Mort has another gear that he can get into if we want. He even early on in the episode, like his first answer, he was like, yada, yada, yada. And I stopped him and I said, hey, Mort, you can always end your thought, but never feel like a need to yada, yada, yada. If you want to yap for another 3 minutes, that's what we're here for. Like, give it to us with all the complexity you got, buddy. This is fun. And I feel like we achieved that. I feel like we got, a really deep look under the hood of TFT from the mind of the person who is, there's a lot of people behind it. He's the person most significantly behind it. His influence is the largest of any single human on the future of the game. So it was really, I nerded out about TFT with him. It was a true treat.
Was there anything, so you said that there's something you felt like you disagreed, and that was parts where I was cutting in and out. So was there anything that specifically stood out about like one of the topics that you brought up that struck you?
There was an argument we had as it related to trait power and perception of the game. And I was making the argument that when Mort's argument was quite simple. He was basically like, look, we have these traits over here. That's what people pay attention to. Anytime a chatter is watching a streamer, they're always constantly like, oh, 3 out of whatever, 4 out of 5, like blah blah blah, right? Like making fun of how they're inefficiently using the synergy bar. And so Mort, he says, hey, that's just the heart of the game, which means it needs to always get better going up. It needs to that's part of what you expect when you teach someone TFT 101 is that you can just keep adding to this trait and it just gets better and better. And I was saying, yeah, that's true. And I think that's important up to a point, but I don't think that you lose anything by making it so that there's a more optimal way of playing the game that's really hard, like playing True Flex TFT, that if you do that, if you build a really interesting, thoughtful horizontal board, that it beats the vertical board, unless the vertical board is prismatic level. And he just completely disagree with that. He said this is just a thing that you have to expect when you play TFT, and I really disagree with that at its core. And I think it forces this negative interaction that we feel. I don't think there's anything harmful to the overall player base if you learn a game. Listen, every sport on planet Earth, you take shortcuts when you're learning the sport, right? And then eventually you get to the point where you're playing it at a truly expert professional level, and it's a little bit of a different game. The meta of professional basketball is dramatically different than the meta of college basketball, primarily because they're so much better. Right? If every single person on the court can shoot threes at a clip better than basically anyone on the court at the level below, you're playing different sport. And so for me, I don't think there's anything wrong with challenger level TFT feeling like you're playing a slightly different sport and creating space for that sport to exist in a way that won't disrupt the people underneath it. And if you learn that verticals are really good and you get all the way up to masters and now you're struggling, cool. Now you have another part of the game to learn. You have to learn how to build a board. And that's interesting and fun and challenging and rewarding, and go on that journey if you want to get better, or don't, just stay masters. But if you want to be challenger, then this is what you got to do.
Yeah. Okay. That's totally fair. I think that already exists. I think challenge, especially in the current way TFT is, the way the game is experienced at challenger level is very different even from masters, in my opinion.
Of course.
And so on and so forth. So I think what you're arguing is for like even the very top ends of challenger, the nitty gritty stuff.
No, I'm more speaking specifically about the opportunity. So challengers do a billion things better than master players, right? So depending on the meta, they're going to be beating you in different ways. But I'm saying I really enjoy TFT when a big part of the way the challenger player beats the masters player is by cooking, by like really building a board fluidly. And so but a lot of patches, there's not space to do that. So then you just take that opportunity for skill expression off the table. I'm saying I want that opportunity for skill expression to be on the table. And actually, I would like it to be a significant option at all times. That's easier said than done, but that should be the goal in my eyes. And I think that trade-off is super worth it in relation to what it means to like make verticals at their top end weaker than horizontals.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like TFT has selected the inverse way. People who cook tend to be the people who are lower ranked to try and beat the challenger players, as opposed to the other way around. What we know about good TFT and the good TFT player base might end up flipping on its head, assuming that's what ends up happening. Let's say your version happens. All of a sudden, is someone like Milk, for example, is he actually even going to be considered good anymore, considering that he's much more about the iteration and the execution, as opposed to say like the ridiculous cooking and the all the creativity and nuance going into it?
Well, the reality of TFT is that the version that I'm talking about, we called it Utopian for a reason. It's really hard to achieve, even if it's the goal. It doesn't mean you're always going to be able to do that. The balance of this game is fucking bananas in its complexity. So you shoot for that, and then sometimes you fall a little bit short and there's still some room, and sometimes you fall all the way short and there's no room. And one of my favorite things actually is when you can throw a little bit more patch diversity and skill expression diversity into TFT. It does actually, it's part of what makes like Robin's run so impressive and why we really kind of fawned over his consistency on the final episode, because it was super deserving. It's so hard to be at that level no matter what's going on in TFT. Almost no one is able to do it.
Sure. I totally understand it. All right. Well, either way, fun stuff to reflect upon from that conversation. And I think it kind of segues into our last segment here. So we're going to do our last set of agrees, at least as far as we know, Bryce. We're going to do just a few for this special portion. And so this one is probably just related to what we just talked about. And so I'm going to kick it off with this one, which is TFT will die if/when Mortdog leaves Riot. I think a lot of people talk about like whether or not TFT can continue if something happens if Mort leaves, whether on his terms or not. What happens to TFT, right? And you don't have to hang. I think for this section, let's not be too literal. Like, will TFT literally die? Probably not. But in terms of how does the game really can it recover from that in a meaningful way? I think let's take the spirit of it instead of like pick apart the syntax or the semantics here.
I think it depends a lot on when and how this exit occurs. It is very clear that part of what we've been struggling with in TFT, from the outside looking in at least, sets 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, is that the game went from something that was at a scale that Mort could basically have his finger on everything all the time to a game where he couldn't. And so then he had to create systems and processes underneath him that could work to really build great TFT. They had to start planning further in advance. They're doing more sets because they're on the 4-month cadence. Like, all these things are happening. So he can't be everywhere all at once as much as he tries to be, right? And his reach is phenomenal relative to, anyone basically. And so I don't think I don't get the perception personally that they're ready yet. I think that when you look at things like the level of balance miss in set 12, and then I think there's been some material design misses in the previous sets on a number of key areas, but then some amazing design wins. I think that they're still figuring it out. And I think that his leadership, his institutional knowledge, his gut, I think people really undervalue Mortdog's gut as it relates to some of this stuff. Like, yeah, he may not be the elite challenger player, right? He's not getting rank 1 even if he tries, but that he's rank 1 at understanding TFT. I'm sorry, he just is. Like, he's thought about this 100x more, and any pro who thinks otherwise is just honestly stupid. So I think that we really need him for at least some period of time, but I could see a world in which he sets up the transition to make it okay, or if it happens after a certain amount of time, it's okay, whether it's orchestrated or not.
So you're like agree for now.
Agree for now.
Okay. I think I agree with, I think I basically echo that sentiment. I agree that if he leaves between now and probably like until somewhere in the 20s, I think TFT will take such a huge hit, both in terms of what's happening in front of the scenes, but also behind the scenes. A couple of things, and I have to tread the line here because obviously I'm privy to some information whenever I hang out with Mort. He tells me some stories about what goes on behind the scenes. But there's been on numerous occasions, even in the most recent past, where Mort's had to step in to literally save the set, and he's not going to like take credit for that.
No,
and I feel like I don't want to go too much more because it feels like I'm glorifying him maybe even more than he wants to. But even for things like set 10, moments in set 11, right, and parts of set 12 are a lot of what you're feeling, both positive and negatively, is because of Mort. A lot of the things that people love were like maybe last second pivots that Mort was like able to come in and be like, wait, why did we do this? Let's do a bunch of changes. This is like, how it is. And then also the inverse of it, right? When Mortdog went on vacation for set 12 PB, came back, Syndra was in a terrible spot, nerfed her, but then obviously didn't nerf her in time.
And they hit her hard.
But it turned out it was the animation speed, not the numbers. Yeah. But like if he was able to do that, but like the absence of him, you saw like what happened, and that actually happened in a few different cases. 9.5 is another scenario where the absence of Mort was very much felt. So I think that, to your point, Riot has hired many designers and have tried to interview many designers, both internally for people who understand League of Legends, Legends of Runeterra, right, Wild Rift. They have a lot of devs who understand the Riot ecosystem. They play TFT, they love TFT. They're still not that good at designing TFT. They can play TFT well, but like designing and understanding TFT is a completely different skill set because you have to understand the intricate systems of how everything interacts, and most importantly, problem solve. I think so many people can bring up, this feels wrong, this doesn't feel right. Like, but what was to solve, right? And I think that's where Mort's really good at. I think he's good at bringing the solve. The second thing is that I think that most people don't understand the true problems of TFT. The true problems of TFT aren't things like whether or not forecasts are better than rerolls, or whether or not the shop odds and the bag size. The true problems of TFT are fundamental things about the game, like how players draft against each other and different like ways the leveling system and like how gold and economy works relative to stage 2 and stage 4. There's a lot of like fundamental things that Mortdog has like he could write like a
Yes.
PhD
Like
on.
he could do a dissertation
He
on
do a
this shit.
full
for
on
sure.
dissertation.
Yeah.
That like I think most people would not be interested in, but those are real problems that I think he is working on. That I feel like if he were to leave, we would never. We had to have someone start over, right? And the gaps that are left, not just from, again, being the public face and sort of being the team leader and shield and almost kind of like the primary ambassador for the game while also being the designer of the game. There's just too much at stake right now. So if he did leave in the next couple of years, I think we're in serious trouble. But as far as I know, he's not interested in leaving. He wants 10 years of TFT, and it's year 6. So I think by his own desire, he wants to be here for a long while longer. And so
this is his baby. He's more invested in it than any of us. It's why sometimes his temper can run hot because he's so passionate about it, right? Yeah. It means so much to him. He's given so much of his life, and also he knows he understands his potential. There was my favorite comment for the whole episode was not any substantive thing he said about the game. It was a simple reflection. It was, you guys spend so much time thinking about the game as it is. I have to spend a lot of my time thinking about what the game could be, which is such a simple and yet wonderfully profound summary of the role that he plays in connection with TFT. Is that we're just like along for the ride and armchair quarterbacking every single fucking decision that this team makes. But this team is creating from thin air, right? They copied at the very beginning, right? They copied someone else's homework at the very, very, very beginning.
The step one of any Riot game.
but then very quickly after that, it's like, oh, well, these are the only people left in the class. Like all these other people failed out, right? And it's like you're figuring it out on your own. And they're figuring it out on their own. They're doing so much interesting stuff to push the genre forward, to push the game forward, and that is where a lot of Mort's time is, and that's I think ultimately why he stays as well, because I think he feels like he has unfinished business. And I think he does too. As great as this game is, I think that they continue to learn on it, and I think that TFT in the future could be. I mean, I already think it's the greatest strategy game ever created, but I think it could just be the best game. I don't know. We'll see.
Wow.
It could get so good. I think at its core, this feeling of the level of variance that TFT throws at you, while at the same time, in a perfect world, creating a shitload of opportunity for skill expression to constantly combat that variance and deal with it. There's no game I can think of that's quite like it.
Yeah, at least at a multiplayer level, because I think TFT will always struggle with the fact that it's inherently competitive. And this is sort of like getting away from the agree, but just kind of, following up on that thought is that, there's gonna, like, my sister-in-law Michelle, she loves roguelike, she plays Slay the Spire, she plays Bellagio, she won't ever touch TFT because she doesn't want to play against 7 other people. Yeah, and I think that's where Mortdog and them need to figure out, because I think TFT can be for those people, but they think that's not the case. That's where I think, we could solve TFT. How do we make it a good mobile experience? How do we make it to reach the masses so that it doesn't feel like you have to have like it's ironic that TFT almost feels like you have to have like a decent PC to run it. Otherwise, you're not really getting like the actual experience. And so there's a lot of like interesting things about the game that I would love to see Mortdog and them solve, not just, game design and balance, which tends to be what most people focus on, at least based off the people who surround our content.
Yep.
All right. That's the first one.
Love it.
Number 2, we're going to go a little bit of a different direction, but it's still bigger picture. This one is TFT is more difficult of a game to commentate than other mainstream esports such as League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Dota, Rocket League, etc. I just want to take this opportunity to reflect on your commentary career, Bryce. And so I kind of wanted to bridge into this. And you have a unique perspective because you go to these events, you represent a lot of these, both players and talent, and you've also walked a mile in the shoes. So so you've seen it all.
Yeah, we've worked for a bunch of broadcast talent. Like I've repped, Overwatch League, CS, League of Legends, broadcast talent, right? Valorant, like a bunch of it. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, I would say that it's very different. Whether or not was the question, was it more difficult? Is it harder?
Yeah, it's more difficult of a game to commentate than other mainstream esports. And you can interpret this in any way you want.
Okay, here's what I'll say. I'm going to give you a lawyerly answer. I think I'm not sure if it's harder or easier, but I think it sorts for something very different. And I think that a game like any of the games we mentioned, Valorant, CSGO, League of Legends, whatever, there is an unbelievable technical aspect to being a good caster that is really put into premium. You know, like what Captain Flowers can do to shoutcast a fight in the LCS, or I mean, just one random example, but there you could go on and on. There are literally dozens of casters in these games that it's just their technical skill, their voice control, the way they can like parse a fight, right? The way they look at a fight and can understand exactly what to look at and to commentate from that lens and like really tell the story of a fight. It's phenomenal. It really is. And there is some strategic overlay to all of this as well. All of these guys are very smart about their games, right? Like these guys are, and some of them are like really, really smart, right? Like Cadril, for example, like very, very, very smart about League of Legends. Anyone who doesn't think that has never watched his content, I guess. I don't know. Right. But I will say that on average, those folks are required to do from a strategic perspective relative to what a TFT caster has to do, it's very different. TFT is just play with your brain. I think I mean, look, I guess if we're fully reflecting on TFT casting journey, I've obviously been critical of the past. I have said, I am on the record as saying that I think that for a major TFT event, if you can't at the very least get to challenger very easily, then you probably shouldn't be as like on the main broadcast for like a major event. That's a controversial take. There's definitely casters fall below that. I think those casters do add a lot to the broadcast, so I'm not shit talking any of them individually, and some of them I really, really like. But I think that at the end of the day, this is a game that's just about decision making, and if you're gonna be on the broadcast, you have to like understand the decisions that are being made for real. And getting to challenger is table stakes for that. Like anyone who's played the game at the level we're talking about, like I get to challenger in my sleep. It's not like that's not a hard, like it's just it takes a couple hundred games. I have to like sort of know what I'm doing, and I'm so many orders of magnitude at that point in time worse than the players that are playing in these major events, like, you know, playing at NA regionals or playing at Worlds. So if you have to be able to at least get in their ballpark to be able to get in their head to really be able to analyze these decisions and to bring the game to life in the way that I think it deserves to be brought to life. Because if the game is only decision making, then you just need broadcast how to do that, and you want it to be entertaining and engaging. You want there to be storyline stuff. It's part of the reason why when you analyze TFT casters, there is only one S tier broadcast talent, and it's Dan.
No.
And it's not close. And you could make an argument
and he's
that
retiring. He's quitting the scene.
You could take an
we
argument.
Lost our only S tier talent, Bryce.
No, you're not. You're still doing. Your co-streams are basically that. I mean, and you're still doing Macau and stuff. Like, I mean, you're getting to do it in exactly the way you want, which is great because it then gives you even more product control, right? Which is really good because your product instincts for competitive TFT are fucking insanely good. But just as a broadcast talent, you can bring the knowledge of the elite pro player while also bringing like the technical capability of all the broadcast talent we're talking about from League of Legends, CSGO, and your storylines are killer and you follow all the regions, and it's just so much more well-rounded. At my peak, at my best, I was just a guy who knew a lot about TFT and could do it somewhat entertainingly, mostly in conjunction with you. And I think for a lot of people who have broadcast TFT at their peak, it's some, you know, they might be better at some of this stuff or worse at some of this stuff, but there are very, very few people who have been on broadcast who I think check the knowledge box to make TFT feel special in the way I think it deserves to feel special for those events.
Man, that's some big glaze. I'm actually sad we don't have chat for this to spam the W glaze. Well, I appreciate that, and so I do agree a lot about what I want out of the broadcast. I think what you're describing is what I want. What I want is I want to take the insightful, compelling, deep commentary of what chess and to a certain extent poker can be. I think poker commentary actually is, unfortunately for TV, like pretty shallow, but I've seen good commentary poker, and I love it because they tap so deep into the player and the player head to head and what they're trying to go through, and that inspires me a lot. And I think you can kind of bridge that with the excitement and the combat of what, you know, TFT has to offer that mimics League of Legends to a certain degree. And I feel like those kinds of moments, you know, I still don't think we're very good at commentating TFT. I think it'll be fun to see if the game is able to live that long. It'll be fun to see 10 years from now how everything evolves, because even the way they do League of Legends now, presentation wise,
totally,
right, they're so far much along than the first days. Go and watch the first early days of League of Legends, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Not even just necessarily just like the way we talk about it, but just like the presentation tools, right? Stats and overlays and relevant things that we want to talk about. So I think we're still very early days, like the baby stages of TFT.
Definitely. And the TFT broadcast product is going to improve so much. We're going to be able to pull stats and data in a way that is going to be uniquely amazing for TFT. Like, it's happening to esports and sports all over the world. And TFT is a game that can be brought to life by stats, you know, as we know. And so there's a lot of stuff that we're going to be able to do with the future of TFT broadcasts that I can't wait to see. But yeah, you'll in whatever happens, you'll be at the forefront of it. You'll be the one you think about this the most. You come in, you both have the most innate talent for this, and you're the hardest worker. And so it'll be cool to see what it is. And I hope I get to tap back in, if only briefly, just to like be along for the ride and just be kind of, you know, just see what it evolves to. I mean, I've gone on the record that I think fights should be cast at the end of major tournaments. I never really actually got to experiment that in the way that I wanted to, but I really think it could be great, especially on main broadcast. Maybe not the co-stream, but I don't know. I think it'd be hype.
That's another element that's sort of been, you know, I don't consider myself a commentator anymore in TFT. I consider myself a personality, you know. Yep. If the esports awards were to look at teamfight tactics ever again, and they would look at like people like me, I hope they wouldn't say like, you know, a play-by-play caster or an analyst or anything like that. I just consider myself like a content creator or like a personality in that category. But when I did commentate TFT, this was a game much more challenging than any other game that I've ever encountered, and I feel pretty uniquely qualified to talk about it as well.
Yeah, you are super qualified to say this.
Because I started in StarCraft, I did League of Legends, and then I did Hearthstone for a while, and I've also done other games. You've
done Valorant. You were before you pivoted into TFT. You were like it felt very likely like you were going down the Valorant.
Yes, I actually wanted to throw my hat into the ring for Valorant. And I was trying, and I actually did cast Valorant, and I casted Smash Bros at Evo. Hosted Street Fighter, so I've done pretty much like all the major genres.
That's fucking insane, by the way. I mean, there are so few broadcast talent that can say that. So.
Yeah, and so I'm very blessed to be able to have all those experiences. And I just want to tell you, like, it's not that like TFT is just straight up harder in terms of like this grading difficulty of like this is hard and this is not, or this is strictly harder. But the things that TFT demands out of you to be a top level commentator is pretty steep compared to almost any other game, because the baseline proficiency of even understanding everything at that level almost just requires you to be equivalent of like the full-time commentators for League of Legends. So I think that's why so many people struggle, because TFT as a commentator is not actually a lucrative career at all. Like when I was casting TFT for the whole year, I made like $30,000 total for the year, man.
And that was, you made the most.
And I made the most, right?
You did everything. More than you. and you had the highest day rate. So like that's peak. Rate. That's the ceiling, ladies.
That's not paying the bills.
And that was when we had main broadcasts for the cups, broadcast like now it's like that number is so far out of reach.
Now there's 1/4 as many opportunities. So like some people legitimately are making 4 digits a year casting TFT, and that just can't pay the bills. So like, how can you justify even getting to that level, right? It almost takes an insane, delusional person to pursue that. And for me, that's part of what I stepped away. I mean, I didn't step away for the money aspect at all. I think, if anything, we lost money stepping away to do co-streaming.
In the short term.
In the short, I guess, well, I mean, and I still have yet to even break even on that.
Yeah, you're betting on yourself.
I'm still like in the red effectively for all the time. Yeah. All the opportunities I turned down, I'm still effectively in the red for that.
Yes, but it's going to pay off.
That's not the point.
Yes.
That's not the point. The point is because I believe the storytelling of a game like TFT is so unique. It has all the elements of what I want in a strategy game. It combines sort of this chaotic, unpredictable, any given Sunday elements of, you know, the variance games, but also even like drawing in things that are compelling about Apex Legends and Fortnite and Call of Duty Warzone, right? Like all this like chaos of what's happening, but you kind of have to, but after you witness everything, there's a story to be told about the hero that emerges triumphant. And I think that challenge has been so fascinating to try and wrap my head around. And I think that I actually believe that TFT is much better as a co-stream game than actually presented as like a dressed up product in a stadium with an official broadcast. Like I
We
prefer it this way. I don't see myself ever going back.
we knew it from the moment we did the first summit. It was just so because the summit, the commentary at the summit, for those of you who've ever watched others or if you haven't, it's very similar. It's like laid back, kind of almost. It was a main broadcast with co-stream energy, is how I would describe the summit. And some of my favorite esports moments across multiple games happened at summits, including in TFT. And it was just so clear when it was like, okay, your main broadcast, it's serious, you care, but it's laid back, it's conversational. Energetically, it just matches TFT so much better. And yeah, I mean, I have no regrets. I loved
That was
doing the
the
co-stream
best,
with you.
man. It's actually literally hung. I'm gonna go grab it real quick. It's literally hung up on my wall.
Mine is literally.
You see it, right? This is us hugging at the summit.
Yep. And mine is right there. It's the thing right behind me too, Dan. And yeah, I mean, I look at it all the time. It's the same picture of us hugging, and then there's slightly different pictures on the top because there's one picture where you're going bananas and one picture where I'm going bananas. So I made yours slightly different. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a core memory for me, the TFT Summit. Everything about it. It was so much fun. We got to play and we were kind of competitive. And if I knew to slam Gunblade on Viego, which I just didn't know, but if I knew to slam Gunblade on Vega, we probably actually get into the top 8. I think, or at least there's a good chance
we probably would have done better. And also, I am so much better at the game now than I was back then.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like I feel like I would be so much of a better partner for as well.
Yeah, and it was such a weird partnership because you had done way more work on the set going in. So I was the better player, but you had so much more knowledge. So you had to like basically macro my games while playing yours. It was too much for you to have to do. I needed to know more so that you didn't have to play my part of my game and all of yours, basically. Yeah. But it was fun as hell. And the broadcast experience was just perfect. And then we just, never looked back. We knew from that moment on that this was the optimal way to think about a TFT broadcast. And by the way, I think that's true, noob friendly or not. Like, as much as I get the rap for being the guy that is like I'm like almost a TFT elitist, I think, for like all of my opinions ultimately root back to like the maximum possible skill expression. And this is true. And I will wear that as a badge of honor, actually. But I do want to bring people along for the ride. I really think that part of why you need people of a certain level on the TFT broadcast is because you want to bring this to life. You need to make the people, you can explain it in a way that they're going to engage with. I think people watching TFT broadcasts in general, it's kind of boring unless you're like in a TFT, right? You're either already good at TFT or you're thinking about it, you want to get better, right? Because it's all decision making. There's no fucking action in this game. So the broadcast can help bring anyone along for the ride, no matter where they're at in their TFT journey. I firmly believe that. Mm-hmm. But part of that also means we should be constantly taking a look behind the curtain of what is like elite, how complex it is, how beautiful, how magical this game is. I think if you're not bringing that to life, then you're just not doing it service, not doing justice.
Well said. I feel like I think people often confuse like volume for enthusiasm, like genuine enthusiasm for the game. Curiosity is what also, like, I just think like those kinds of things are much more compelling about what makes TFT, like, as opposed to like feeling like you have to predict everything and you have to be so hype about it. And it's like, well, look at this big ultimate. And it's like, yeah, it's cool. It's like admiring a visual effect of a trailer for the set, but understanding what really makes all the dominoes in the game, because the game is just purely about like this set of events. It's almost just the butterfly effect of like this happens and so many other things, different things, like, but everyone's trying to influence it at the same time, right? And you have this like really interesting, I mean, they called the convergence for a region, which is a good name, although it's a little bit cheesy. That's exactly why they call it that.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, it's such a cool thing, TFT, especially when it's good. And so trying to bring it to life on broadcast, having that fun. I mean, my like top 3 favorite casting moment was the Appy's Chemtech Narbor, where I have no fucking idea. I'm literally just processing in real time, asking questions. I don't give any analysis of the board if you watch it back. And I think it was great because the board was fucking absurd. No one would have ever built that board than Spicy Appy, certainly not in tournament, and they wouldn't have found any success if they tried. So the fact that he had the audacity to attempt it, I feel like the only way to do it justice was just think out loud about it for like 45 seconds. Fuck was going on there? You and I talked about that board for like 5 minutes that game. We couldn't figure it out.
We did. And then the others were Summit and what's your third?
third favorite casting moment.
If you have it, I mean, we can even circle back.
Yeah, I'd have to think about what are yours. What are your top?
Well, Summit being one of them for sure. The Solus
for sure.
Kurum final moments.
Solus Kurum
Just the
thing was
entire
just-
weekend was so good.
Yes.
I Summit's never gonna happen again, mainly because Bebe's never gonna come back. And I think that was such an interesting curveball that gave it was like part of the secret sauce of why that event was so good.
I agree. He was great. He was great.
He was amazing, and I wish him best of luck. I think he's in business school right now. So Vegas was really special for a different reason. It was like when I was doing Final Lobby, it really felt, and I've talked about it a couple times, even in our previous episode when we had Gangly and we did the open reflection, but it just really felt like TFT arrived as like a competitive game. It was like, wow, this is a community. This is the event. These are kind of like it felt. I think it's because we've just never had worlds on LAN. We've never even done regionals with players on LAN, and just it felt everything online remote feels just a little bit hollow. But everything felt so real, and just like I felt everyone's energy kind of going through me. And if you actually go back and listen to my commentary for the final lobby of Vegas, a lot of it's just me making monkey noise. I actually just turned decadral. I was literally just going gorilla mode, like whoa, 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 whoa. The anti-spell weaver, oh my god, the misfortune jazz. I was just losing my mind. But then everyone kept coming and be like, you did so great. And I'm like, man, I gotta be honest with you. I didn't even think I was saying anything intelligible at all. But I think it was one of those moments where, like, even day one, I remember tweeting, I already know this is going to be one of the greatest weekends in TFT history. Just from the first night. I'm just like, I just felt it. And it was like truly special. So
the energy was insane. And that's why I'm sad missing Macau. Macau's going to be great. But I will say, wherever they do the one in 2 years, that one's going to be bananas, or like in a year from now, basically, right? Because they've clearly proven that they need this event. This event needs to be bigger. They're selling out tickets instantaneously.
Again.
They could sell so many more tickets if they had a space to do it. So I'll be really curious to see if it wouldn't. I mean, double size, I think, is table stakes. I'd be surprised if they didn't double the size, but it wouldn't even shock me if they went bigger than double. It's going to be cool.
I would love to see them do more, right? I think people want more. I don't know if it's like I don't think it could be like a once a set thing, but I think twice a year could be reasonable. But the going back, and that actually kind of is some of a segue into the other part of this, which is 4v4 commentary for TFT is also lit. It is actually so cool. But I think it's a final evolution, a glorious evolution, if you will.
Nice.
Have you watched season 2?
No, but I know that it's
okay. That's definitely one of the taglines of it. I think it is very much a glorious evolution of TFT because you need to kind of have a certain state of appreciation for what competitive TFT is, and then 4v4 kind of shatters that and brings it all together in a new dimension. But yeah, we've talked about it at length.
It sounds
rambled
cool.
on in this episode many times about it. So
yeah, but if we don't talk about it, then Milk's going to be in our DMs being like, "Hey, why do you guys record more and not talk about 4v4?"
I mean, the at its core, the main reason why is because you finally understand everything that's happening at once. Because there's just one storyline to follow, which is Team A versus Team B. In TFT solo queue or individuals, it's just like there's 8 things, and usually there's like 2.5 stories you can follow. Like, how is Dishlub gonna do? And then is this, the other play is Soju in the lobby? But like, you can't follow everything. But everyone has like a role, and you navigate through that, and it all funnels into one storyline of this team faces this team, and the fights are so like every fight is really important for it, even for 6th, 7th, 8th place. When in a lot of cases it feels like, okay, well, this is just a wash. This person's just trying to get a 7th and get out, a 6th and get out, and that's almost like not interesting in a way because you're kind of like
it's not.
They're just waiting for inevitable on both sides, like person high rolling, person low rolling. But it creates like this moment where like 7th and 8th, the difference between that is huge. 4th and 5th, because it's this huge, and then of course whoever wins the lobby has a tiebreaker. So it kind of creates like a huge climactic moment buildup, and it flips the formula on its head because in the past you kind of play for placements. In TFT you play for in 4v4 you play for macro and you play for the win, and it's so different because it's checkmate every game. This is where Milk fails to articulate. It does. But it is such a compelling format to watch from start to finish. And then the cool thing is it's just TFT. So there's like prismatic starts, throws everything out the window. Like Fnatic, as when I was coaching, we had a game plan, and then we got hit with triple prismatic lobbies, and it was just complete utter nonsense from start to finish. So you still have the ultimate secret sauce of what makes TFT fun to watch.
There's a whole strategic overlay that doesn't exist outside of 4v4 where you're playing around it. There's like denial is a lot more interesting part of the game because when you can do it in mass, it actually can have a pretty big influence. It almost feels like you get to the part of the game where things kind of get interesting, like stage 4, and then it's just chaos from then on because fights do a lot of damage. There's all sorts of craziness happening, eking out placements against one another. There's weakening boards to play around, and trying to play around each other while playing around opponents. There's just so much happening that you literally could just talk nonstop about what's going on, and you won't even come close to covering all the strategy that everyone is going through to actually figure out what they're doing.
Yeah. When I say it's a glorious evolution, because I could see a world where maybe at a certain point of the maturation of the scene, I could see like an actual 4v4 scene develop. I don't know if it'll ever replace solos, but I could see it being something as like a good complementary thing, kind of similar to, I actually like the comparison of StarCraft, because StarCraft has a individual league and then they have pro league with teams, and they alternate season after season, and they care about it a lot. Like Flash and Jaedong winning ASL, MSL is as important to winning Korean pro or team pro league for them, right? And that's how T1 built their name. People might think T1 as like now basically the best League of Legends org ever, and Faker being the goat of esports. But they got their start back when they were signing a bunch of StarCraft players, right? And it originated from that. So I have high hopes that that's eventually where we could land.
I hope so too. I think 4v4 is fascinating. I'd love to see more of it.
All right, last topic, Bryce. The last one, and this is to zoom out the biggest we possibly can here. Competitive TFT will eventually breach the realm of relevance similar to Pokemon and Magic the Gathering. And I'm talking about competitive TFT relative to how competitive Pokemon, competitive Magic the Gathering, right, kind of inserted themselves culturally. Can TFT at least get to that state? It's it's already borderline mainstream gaming, like mainstream adjacent, because of how sheerly popular it is in terms of player count. Can they breach that realm of relevance that we see inevitably, right? And part of the reason why I think a lot of people are going to say no. I can go first here. So I can say, I think immediately I'm just going to disagree purely because TFT has to clear one barrier, which is time. Pokemon has been around since the early 90s. Magic has been around since the early 90s. They've had almost 30 years to build onto this. And TFT is building off of League of Legends, which has been around for only 10 years. But in 15 years, if TFT is still around, and maybe we innovate, maybe like a new version of TFT comes out, maybe a new version of League of Legends come out, right? They're doing like Swift Play and everything like that. I can see that. I would love it for it to be a real thing, but there's two elements of why I can't agree with this. The first is that the barrier to entry to new players is just too hard. I think right now, I made 2 videos of how to get into TFT in the past 6 months. I made one for Riot, I made one for TFT Academy. And the feedback that I've gotten on both ends is the beginner player says, I still don't know what I'm looking at. Like, I'm trying really hard. I want to like this game, but I still like you're explaining it and I'm still not getting it. There's just like a certain amount of process that that people are just not clicking with, like understanding what's happening compared to something like a shooter game like Counter-Strike. The second is that I think competitive TFT needs to, if they really want to get here, has to start getting the young audience. They have to start hitting like Pokemon has a junior division. Magic the Gathering is something that is also like where a lot of young people end up kind of having like the social circles and dynamics, even though it's becoming kind of expensive. I think TFT may struggle with younger and newer audiences as time goes on. And I worry that the player base will just age instead of having young blood.
I think it's all super fair. I think Eileen disagree on the statement as well. I think Pokemon is a really unfair comparison because Pokemon originates from, like, Pokemon is literally the most valuable IP on planet Earth, right? So I don't even think the card game's that good. I just think it's attached to Pokemon. And I say this is yeah. I think that stuff is fine. I don't think it's like bad. I just don't think it's not pound for pound the game that TFT is, but it doesn't need to be, right? That's the whole point. In fact, it shouldn't be, right? Because of the level of IP penetration globally and what like the audience is trying to cultivate is and what it really cares about. So I definitely won't get as big as Pokemon. I think that's just like impossible. Magic is a little bit of an interesting comparison because Magic's IP is now valuable, but it's they built it all around the card game, whereas TFT is now in this weird IP landscape where it started off just stealing from League of Legends, and now it's especially this set, like it's a very interesting moment to be having this conversation because a bunch of units came to TFT this set, Vander and Bessa, etc., that are not part of the game League of Legends. And if I would bet so much money that these characters are characters in League of Legends in the next 2 years or whatever, because they now have more lore about them, more backstory, more generic fan affinity for them than like almost all of the other League of Legends characters, because they never really told these stories. It was never a part of what they did. And Arcane is this wildly successful initial foray into like trying to make the IP of League of Legends valuable. And they're done with the show, but it's clear they want to tell more stories in League of Legends universe, as they should, because there's enormous fan affinity. So it's a built-in audience for any content they create. And they have extremely talented creatives who do a kick-ass job. So yeah, I mean, I think TFT now plays a role in like the overall IP loop, almost like as a launching point for things that they want to create outside of the League of Legends universe. And so I could see a world in which it can pass what Magic is right now. Magic, I assume, also that player base. I know that they engage with kids. Magic's also really interesting because the game is totally different competitively now, right? Like, you still have the hardcore
sort
Uber
of.
sweats. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not completely different competitively. It's that what the game is and who it's there for is very different. Like Magic was a hardcore competitors card game for years, and now the most popular format's Commander, and like casual Magic is a huge part of Magic, which is a gigantic change that has had a lot of influence on the evolution of Magic and its audience. That I don't know if TFT goes through something similar.
Yeah, fair enough. Pokemon's probably too big of a scope. I guess I was in my mind when I probably should just change this to VGC.
Sure, makes sense.
And Magic the Gathering, specifically the Pro Tour, because I think a lot of people are kind of like wondering what is the future of TFT, because a lot of people are migrating from other games here to try and call it home. Yeah, it's just interesting to hear your thoughts on it.
I can't wait to see where TFT goes, because they're nowhere close to done cooking. And the cool thing about releasing 3 sets a year is they just get to take a lot of swings at it, and so we'll see.
Okay. So Bryce, those are all of our agrees. We're
done agreeing, Dan.
We're done
no
agreeing or disagreeing. I want to take my last segment here, and then you're gonna do a segment. I think it's gonna wrap it up here. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to do the thing? Because basically, I have the fan.
Let's do that, and then
Okay.
I'll say goodbye.
So in closing, I asked people to send in comments, thoughts about what they liked about the show, just kind of as a goodbye from them to Don't Talk If You Don't Know. So and I got some comments. I couldn't get all of them just because we'd be here for a long time. There's a lot of people that enthusiastically talked about it, but I wanted to kind of drop them. The first is from SB Yao. He says, "Man, how am I going to keep up with TFT now? JK, you guys have been fucking awesome and wish you both the best in whatever you do. Thanks for all the laughs and knowledge." Jeffy85 sends a heart and says, so much love for Don't Talk If You Don't Know and for getting so many of us into the competitive TFT scene. You two have been such game changers. TFT definitely wouldn't be in the same place without you. It's going to be rough here without the GOAT of W Glaze, but I know we're all excited for what you both have cooking up. Get some well-deserved rest, and thanks again for all the effort you put into this community. Thank you, Jeff. From High Five says, Don't Talk If You Don't Know has pushed its impact into TFT in such a fun way with players and community together. I don't think TFT will be the same without it. Cheers for all the hard work put into it, and get some rest. Chabo says, at first I thought Don't Talk If You Don't Know was pretty dumb and pointless. But it introduced me and many other people to the world of competitive TFT and was why I decided to sub to Frodan almost a year ago. I will certainly miss the show, even though I respect why it can't happen anymore.
Hey, hear that, Dan? Plus $5.
Plus
for
$5
like a year.
For a year? Not bad.
That's pretty good. Well, plus $3 for a year. We still take those.
The last one is from Waffle Wafers. He said, I've been following this podcast and watching every episode live since the very start. It's been a constant highlight of my day. for the past couple of years, every time you guys have gone live, hanging out with the rest of the competitive TFT community in the chat. Words can't describe how much fun I've had watching these shows over the years and following along the growth of the competitive community, as well as the format of the show. While I'll still follow the competitive scene because of my love for the personalities, I don't think anything will be able to replace the void left by the show that kept me invested in the competitive season and its players. I know this isn't the end, since there's still one more episode coming. Actually, this was the second to last episode when I asked for this.
Yeah.
But the ending of this episode legit made me tear up while watching because it truly feels like an end of an era. Thank you, Frodan and Bryce, and all the past guests on the show for all the countless hours of entertainment and memes you've brought to the community. I hope this isn't the true end for content similar to this in the future. Hashtag paid chatter, hashtag WGlaze, hashtag not an ad. Thank you, Waffle Wafers.
Thank you, Waffle Waver. Thank you, everybody. That's cool. The outpouring of love since we decided we were done with the show has been it's been special. It's been really cool and really validates what we set out to do, which is we knew that when we built this show, it would not have the world's biggest audience, but we thought that the people who were interested in it would be very interested, if that makes sense. Because we were, and we just said, okay, let's just do that and make something that we want. Like I have gone through an unbelievable amount of turbulence in my life over the course of the time that we have done this podcast. I mean, I've had literally since we launched this podcast, 3 kids, like coming out of a pandemic, moving to Seattle, like tons of work stuff. The esports winter, right? Like my business went through an unbelievable amount of turbulence. Dan got married.
I got laid off
like
twice.
It's been wild, all the stuff that we've gone through. But man, this has been my happy place. It's always been my happy place because it was just it felt like coming home. It was like always my favorite thing in TFT because we could just come and it was the space where I could just be unflinchingly myself. I could just yap for as long as I wanted to, and people were here for it, and we could really get into the weeds and nerd out about TFT and the players. And it was just it was such a fun forum, such a fun hangout every single time to just come and chat TFT with you.
Same, man, same. I don't feel like it feels so. I do co-streams. I try to do the pre-show. I do every pre-show by myself. Anyone that tries to join, man, they're just so clueless about like the storylines and not following anything. They're just like, I expect like this player to do well because I talk to them, and I expect this comp to do well because it's broken. That's like the extent of their pre-show contribution. There's just nobody that matched that level of passion that I was putting in, and that's why I can't do the show without you, Bryce, because I tried, man. There's like, and that doesn't mean there's no people who are passionate, right? Like people like you could ask Gangly, Goobum's offered to step in, and it's like these are fantastic individuals, right? CLE is like, yeah, like how could I contribute? But the reality is there's something really special about the way you and I did it. It's just not the same, and it would change too much, man. But
it was born out of just us being friends and falling in love with this TFT on the similar timeline, and just what people don't realize is the lead up to this show was like Dan and I in call like almost every day. I was taking a break from work and playing, or he was playing and I was spectating and talking about TFT and really learning the game and getting better together, watching VODs together, etc. And so we were just doing all of that on our own. And we said, well, what if we just did like some fraction of this like on a stream and see if people want to join?
Yeah, I was literally sitting on Bryce's couch. And we were like, what should we call the podcast? And then we threw out a bunch of different names. But
shout out to our wives who were like there for all of this, especially Taylor. I mean, Adrian has been unbelievably supportive in terms of like she's understand how much this is meant to me, and she's always created like such room for me, way more than I think a lot of wives would do under similar circumstances. She's been an incredible supporter of the show, so thank you, Adrian. You'll never see this, but thank you. She doesn't even know she doesn't know half the words that are coming in my mouth. She's tried watching the show before; it's impossible. But Dan's wife, Taylor, I mean, she's gone up so above and beyond. She's been here since the very beginning. She helped us ideate, come up with the show name, debated show concepts with us.
Yep, sounding board. She's supportive. Yeah. She makes me dinner before each show. She always tries to time it.
Anytime Milk is on the show, you can guarantee she's going to be in chat trying to keep him in line, which I really appreciate.
Flaming him in chat.
Yep.
And also my cat, Tao, who
go Tao.
I thought we were going to do this just me and you, but Tao's here as well.
Love
he wants to say bye as well, Bryce.
Yeah.
And on that note, I believe you said that you wanted. I believe you told me you wanted to kind of like do one final thing that you wanted to say.
I do. it's gonna feel very different. I still think it's worth like saying a little bit of my piece here because I did sort of collect my thoughts and I did a little bit of it in writing when I first did my retirement statement, but I didn't really like it happened so quickly. Like I made I turned down Macau. I like had a conversation with you. I wrote the statement. I published it. I don't think I had time to like really sit with it and process. So we'll see. I mean, I think that it's hard to replicate the level of emotional energy that we had coming like into hour 6 of the epic final podcast. It was such a wacky but special night. But I do have a few final thoughts. And they're essentially like goodbyes, right? And this is not. The more I've thought about this, the more I think that there is a high likelihood that at some point in time I'm doing something in TFT. I don't think it'll ever be the same again. I don't think I'll ever get back to what I was with the level of consistent investment. But I love this space so much, and I just want to reflect on it while it's all fresh. And then if I get to hang out with you guys more later, then great. Okay, so 3 real goodbyes here. The first one is to the community, which is weird without the chat. I was like very excited about having the chat because really I'm by to the chat. Like at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who have like followed our journey, been part of the co-stream, like, you know, consumed our content on YouTube, whatever. But it really felt like the core energy of the fandom that I interacted with the most, the one that I connected with the most, were the people that were in the DTIYDK chat. Because these were the hardcore followers of an ATFT. So they were likely to be on the other stuff too, right? They'd come for the podcast, they'd stay for the co-stream or for your stream or whatever. And it was a not that big of a group of people, but it was super fun group of people. I always looked forward to seeing what chat was going to be spamming in our show. It was like such a fun thing to interact with and have up. So thank you, chat. Genuinely, I mean, like I've experienced the parts of this that I don't like in co-streaming on Soju's, but I've experienced the parts of this that I really do like, which is that I genuinely loved interacting with this chat every episode, and I would always have it open, and I'd always try to like pay attention on some level and engage on some.
A little too much though. I was like, Bryce,
yeah,
stop talking to chat. Like, you're just yapping to chat.
Yeah, definitely too much. But I want them to feel like they're a part of it because they are a part of it.
I get why. It's fun.
Totally.
It's fun.
And every once in a while, they would give me shit, and it was always justified when they did, so I could never get mad about it.
The one thing that I will be so proud of is that I don't know if you'll ever see another chat room like Don't Talk If You Don't Know that had literally the who's who of everybody in this.
Yes.
Like there's like Soju is there, Mortdog is there, Dishop's there, Setsuko is there. We're there. Emily Wang sometimes is there, right? Like it's like who, like every like other Riot devs are there. It's just like it's really unique chat experience because after that, everyone kind of just goes their own separate ways within their own separate pockets of friends or different cliques and whatnot. It was just a really unique chat experience. I know exactly what you're talking about, Bryce, and that's going to be sorely missed, I think.
For sure. And so my parting words for chat are, we're an overall really positive community, but we can always stand to be more. Sometimes this community can bend towards toxicity. It's very easy to armchair quarterback riots. It's a lot harder to actually think critically and find nuance. But I really hope that if some people who didn't used to do that watch the show and now start to do that, because we always tried to heap fucking pounds of nuance on every major issue that would come up, and I think that's really important. And you can call balls and strikes and you can hold Riot's feet to fire, but try to do it fairly, reasonably, politely, right? And if you are one of those people out there that like agrees with everything I'm saying, don't be afraid to step up and like take a little bit of leadership role in that. There are a lot of times where you just need a little bit of positivity to start going, someone to actually state the other side of the argument to then galvanize a whole bunch of other people who agree with you that just aren't going to take the first step. So try to push, like actually be a positive member of the community, even influencer. And if you are an influencer, I triple down on the statement for you. I think I consider a lot of you friends, and I have a lot of love for a lot of you, but I think this is an area where weak. I think that the pro players have a tremendous amount of influence over community sentiment, and if they were 15% more thoughtful about how they wielded that power, we would be in a dramatically better position. So I hope that some pros hear this and try, at least. And no matter who you are in this community, just appreciate the ride, man. TFT is a beautiful game. It's a beautiful community. I feel blessed to have been a part of it for this period of time, and I hope that you stop and reflect on just how great it is and just enjoy it. Enjoy whatever it is for you, whether you're trying to play professionally or playing professionally, just a fan, trying to hit Masters for the first time, trying to hit Challenge for the first time, whatever your goals are. just really appreciate it and do your best.
Yeah.
So that's the community. My second goodbye is to Dan. This is the part where I was definitely going to cry if we had done it live. I don't know if I will or not. We'll see.
You don't have to. It's just up
I know
to
I
you,
don't
man.
have to. I'm not really in control. Look, man, everything you said and felt about the show is true for me as well. This was always it was like this 5 years has been incredible. I can't imagine my life without it. It's such an influential chapter for me in a lot of really big ways. And my favorite part of it was everything that you and I did together, most especially the podcast, but the co-streams, the casting, learning how to be a caster, just playing more. I miss playing TFT with you. I know it doesn't. There's a lot of reasons. You have a family. I have a family. You know, you're on stream when you're doing TFT stuff. I totally get it, but it was so fun. When like some of my favorite memories of TFT will just be you and me in call playing TFT. So yeah, the hardest part about walking away from all of this is definitely walking away from what we built and what you're going to continue to build. And I feel like I'm kind of getting off the ride earlier than I wanted to, and that sucks. But I have a lot of gratitude for the time I spent on the ride. Yeah.
Me too, man.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, Dan. It really is. And I
hell
can't
of a
wait to
ride.
see. It really has. And it's the game is just heating up, and so are you. Like we've been reflecting on, you know, your content is popping off right now, and so deservedly so. You've worked so hard. It's such a good product. It's so different. You know, it's exactly what a lot of people in the community need. And I'm talking your stream, the co-streams, the TFT Academy, your other podcasts, like all of it. It's all so good and so thoughtful. So your biggest fan always has been and always will be me, and I'll be there in the background rooting for you even if I'm not around. Okay,
Thank you, man. Thank you.
that part.
I want to say that you are getting off a little early. You can come back anytime. Even if I do end up starting something else, you're not going to be replaced. It'll always just be something different. It's been a really it's from the moment we met, I very rarely had moments where I met someone and I felt like I met someone on a spiritual level and connected them so quickly. It almost felt strange, as if like it was a divine moment or divine intervention moment. Where, like I was supposed to kind of meet Bryce and become a lifelong friend with him. And
which makes the night you met Taylor doubly divine, by the way.
Yes, it doubles down because she was the reason we actually even met in the first place. So shout out to Taylor once more. He's getting many shout outs. And I think that throughout our entire journey for the past 5 years has been truly special. It's been one of the best relationship and bonds I've ever had. It's everything that you said is echoed for me. I also want to say that I know that we because TFT used to be the way we spend time together.
Yeah.
I really hope that I really think that I want to, spend more time with you as well, even outside as well. And I think we need to find more ways to do it because we used to use TFT as an excuse, man, to hang out all the time.
Yeah, for sure. If I ever get a chance to like pick it back up as a hobby, it would probably be just to like play and shoot the shit with you.
Yeah. But I also have to say that you will always be with us in spirit because the success that I built, like you lent your time. Your time is so valuable. You're such an important person to everybody that you're involved with. Of course, you're the father of your children, the husband to Adrian, the son to your your parents and everything like that. But you're also so valuable to the industry. You're so valuable to the TFT community. And you lend so much of your time, your money. You supported the show financially. I still have to bill you for for one of our last things here.
Please do.
You've done so much to support, and you've never asked anything in return. You bought people PCs and webcams just to help even push their dream a little bit further. And some of those people were grateful and they converted off it. Some people just took it and ran. But you've never asked for anything in return. And I think that kind of generous spirit, you're one of one. You're one of one. There's no one that's going to be able to take your spot, man. That's why I'm so confident you can get back on the ride whenever, because no one puts that positivity that you try to do with the chat, right? Take that leadership if like you're one of the only people that I think DM Setsuko to try to change his mind. And I think like that speaks volumes of what your character is off camera. I followed suit because of you, right? And so now it's like, well, shit. If Bryce is gone, now it's up to me. I used to like kind of cheat. I'd be like, well, yeah, obviously I agree with Bryce, but he's the one who's so like, you know, emboldened to do so. And now I feel it's easier for me to step out. Now there's just a huge hole left in that respect, let alone all the other different things you do. The success is not because of me, it's because you were a big part of that. And so if you see me do it, whatever I'm building or whatever we're building, whatever our team is doing, you're always a part of that, and you should definitely take credit in some capacity. If the coach team continues to pop off, you help launch that thing. You're a founding father as far as I'm concerned. Just 50-50 with me.
Look, I really appreciate it. As always, you are too kind. I mean, I try not to have like false humility. I know I played in the community. I know I played a role in the building of the show and of the co-stream and stuff. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that it was a supporting role, and at times very lightly supporting. It depended a lot on the context, but it was the nice thing for me is that I knew I could never give TFT my full attention, and I could never like keep up with everything you were doing to get better as a player, as a caster in the space, all the different stuff. But because you and I were such kind of kindred spirits in the way that we approached it, I could just observe what you were doing and try my best to allocate all of my skill points into a thing that could complement what you were doing. And so I always just tried to be like play a complementary role to the much broader role that you were playing in the community, on the broadcasts, on the podcasts, etc. It was just kind of always my guiding light, and that was perfect for me. It was perfect.
Flex in as well, man. This guy's just a flex gamer through and through.
I don't know that I could have done the other stuff. I really enjoyed the thing I did, and it's a perfect segue into the final thing that I want to say, which is kind of like goodbye to TFT almost. And I think this is to the people as well as to the game. But a lot of people don't realize what I do for a living, weirdly. Like, there's all the coleslaw memes. I went by esports law in the game for a little bit, but I mostly just gone by Bryce. And that's because the whole esports law thing was completely divorced from this. This was just me. And I liked it being just me. I liked it being totally divorced from my kind of career. But my career has been esports for over a decade now, and I've done, you know, a lot of business and legal work behind the scenes in a lot of different contexts that I don't really need to get into because it's never really been what it's about for me. I kind of like the fact that I exist differently in this space. But because of all of that, like, I've been so close to it for so long that I have like every gamer dreams of like being a pro, having their moment, right, in some game. And I always had that, but it was never really realistic. And I kind of got to do that in this really wacky but amazing way in TFT. And so it was like this dream come true that I didn't even realize, like, I had it, but I wasn't pursuing it. And then when I fell into it, I was like, oh my God, this is fucking incredible. What if I just ran with this? And then you opened so many doors on the broadcast side. Like, I would have just like done a little bit of like competitive, and that would have been it. But when you open up those doors, it was like, God, this is just amazing. And I do feel like I'm leaving a lot on the table here, especially as a player. Like, I spent a lot of time watching a lot of people play great TFT, and I think a relatively realistic evaluator of my own capabilities and play and skill sets. And it's just so clear to me that if I were to really invest in this, I'd be elite in this. But because I wasn't able to, I got to play this really weird role for a little while. Not that long, if we're being honest. Right, I haven't really done what I do for a while, Dan. Right, you know that. Like,
Yeah.
It's been, you know, I don't remember exactly when it stopped. Probably like set 9, I would guess. Maybe 10. I was pretty in the know for Vegas, so maybe 10 was the end. Part of 10, but when I really loved what I was doing. It's when I could watch everybody and actually have a POV about everybody, and I knew what their strengths and weaknesses were. I had a much better beat on, I think, people's relative prospects than most folks did, because I really did sit down and watch the games, and I tried to evaluate with a really thoughtful, critical eye. And that existing in that space for a year and a half or 2 years, whatever it was, and trying to bring all of that to life on these broadcasts, on the podcast with you, was like such a treat. And I think very few people get to do that, like play that role in any esport community. And so to do that for a little while was just an incredible challenge that I loved every fucking second of. And it's been tapering off for me for a while, and I felt less in the know, and I've hated that because I liked having strong opinions. I liked speaking with authority. I liked, predicting things people wouldn't necessarily expect, and maybe being wrong, maybe being right, but having a talking about it. And so I think this is probably overdue, if I'm really being honest, right? This goodbye. But sometimes the best thing you can do in life and the hardest thing you can do is just the exact same thing. Sometimes you have to know when to say goodbye. And I think that this was just time. It was just time to move forward, close this chapter. Maybe I get to reopen it at some point. Maybe I don't. But as hard as this decision is for me and as emotional as I am about it, I am so confident in the actual decision itself. It's kind of a no-brainer when I really stopped and thought about it. And I think the only reason I hung on for did is because I was so emotionally wrapped up in you and what we were building and it. And
Right.
so I hope that TFT continues to go to the moon, and I hope that I get to come back and dabble in it for at some point in my life. But my heart will always be here, and I just wish nothing but the best for this game, for you, for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Man, I don't really know what to say after all that. That's I guess we should just thank you. Thank you, Bryce, for everything. I kind of already mentioned it, but there's just so much demanded out of you, but we don't deserve you. And we're just really lucky. We high rolled so much. We high rolled Mortdog. We high rolled
You.
Sure. We high rolled
Soju.
Soju, and you're a big part of that as well. I personally I think the analogy that I remember using when I talked about what I want to do in TFT was using Mount Rushmore to try to like use as a goal. But I kind of think about it as sort of like the initial signing Constitution documents and the founding fathers who were in that meeting room. And I view you as kind of like, John Hancock in a lot of ways there. Just like
I appreciate it.
the first guy that just puts his name there. He's always taking the leap forward, driving home the point. So
And I'll wave to you guys on Mount Rushmore. I have no jealousy about that. You, Soju, and Mort are the
I
are the
don't,
Mount Rushmore.
we'll see who ends up making there.
Time will
man.
tell, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna be that. And I'll just say, you invite me to the, when you guys build it or whatever, when you're TFT inducted in the TFT Hall of Fame. Invite me. I'll give a good speech. It'll be a hell of a blaze.
You're the only person I will ask. Amazing. But like you said, it's time. All things must come to an end. We even went longer than we wanted to on this the epilogue, but I think it's worth it. It's been worthwhile. Thank you, everyone in the chat as well. Bryce already said his thanks. Community, like Bryce said, we did it all for you guys. I hope that there's something that we can continue to do that can even touch a little bit of what we've been doing here. Maybe I think competitive TFT is going to be around for a while, so there has to be something in the future, but who knows what the future has in store. Either way, I think that there's a lot to be optimistic for moving forward, and there's going to be some surprises coming even in 2025 and beyond that I think people are going to be very excited about. So with that being said, that's it for this episode. I've never actually wrapped a show before, Bryce. Like this. Whenever I've got a podcast ended, it was always because I didn't know it was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always said, I'll see you next time. But usually that doesn't happen. So
how do you want to do it? How do you sign us off?
It's actually time to sign off. So from Frodan and Bryce, it's been the best of times for the past few years on this podcast. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in. Stay healthy, stay safe out there. And hopefully we'll catch you around.